Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Nightmare's Edge. Today, I have put a collection together of all the true stories I have done this far, either from Reddit or personal entries, so please be sure to check the description for their Reddit handles and the links to their stories. And again, a huge thank you to the authors for allowing me to read those stories. There are some truly disturbing things I have read. Now before we start, if you have a story of your own you'd like to submit, you can check the email in the description. Please send it there. Now sit back, relax, and let me tickle those inner fears.
Joy and Amy moved in down the street when I was in the 4th grade. They were both older than I was, but Amy became a fast friend. Countless afternoons playing made-up games or on the computer were commonplace at the Smith house. One day, Joy plopped down on the chair behind us as we played The Curse of Monkey Island. I'm not sure if it was the curse aspect that made Joy inquire, but she asked if we had ever heard of Bloody Mary. "Oh, that's the one where you talk to the mirror, right?" I exclaimed. I had always been intrigued by things that go bump in the night, probably driven by fear and fascination more than anything. Amy, however, did not share my enthusiasm for learning more. She felt that there were things you just didn't mess with, and this was one of them. "Oh, come on," said Joy. "Let's try it. What harm could it be?" So off we went. We saved our game and made our way to their bathroom down the hall. Once we all squeezed in, we shut the door and turned off the lights. I remember hearing my breathing so loud in my ears, my heart thudded in my chest. This is silly, I thought. Bloody Mary isn't real, and a picture can't hurt you. "I don't want to do this anymore," said Amy. I remember thinking that she had nothing to be afraid of. After all, nothing could really show up in the mirror and hurt us somehow, right? We eventually convinced Amy to do the chant with us. We had to say it 3 times and summon Bloody Mary. We counted down from 3, 2, 1. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Nothing. "Okay, that's enough. We can go now." Amy sounded like she was desperate to leave the bathroom, but Joy and I were both unsatisfied. Nothing had happened. We had to try at least once more. Once again, we convinced Amy to comply with our desires, and the chant started again. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Silence. And then seconds later, Amy is screaming, running from the bathroom in tears. Just before she opens the door, I swear I see a glint of red light in the mirror before the hallway light pierced the dark of the now open bathroom doorway. Joy immediately had gone to Amy to try and placate her. We both began reiterating it was a joke. Anything she potentially saw was just a figment of her imagination. I couldn't let it go after that. I had seen something too. We decided to continue the day and forget about Bloody Mary. We got back into our antics of making up games, which eventually led to a pretend scenario of being pilots. Of course, needing a little more drama to have some action in our game, we pretended an airlock had broken. Joy was leaning slightly back, hanging out of the airlock, while reaching for us. Suddenly, Joy's eyes widen as she's staring at us, and just as quickly, she instantly goes limp with her eyes glazed. Amy and I desperately grab her as she starts to fall completely backwards off the bed. We were able to hold her just long enough to get her back on the bed. We started yelling, pushing, anything to get Joy to respond. Nothing. Amy burst into tears, and I am praying for whatever's happening to stop. I remembered the mirror, the glint of red light, and started praying harder. I asked for Joy to be spared, for any spirits to leave her alone. Seconds felt like hours, but Joy opened her eyes and was instantly confused. Amy was despondent and adamant it was the work of Bloody Mary. I still played aloof and went with an excuse of potentially too much blood rushing to her head, but I think we all knew that she wasn't leaning back long enough or far enough for that excuse to be valid. We were all clearly shaken and decided to call it a day. No one wanted to tell Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and no one dared go back into the bathroom. Joy didn't seem quite herself either, like something was weighing on her mind. I didn't go visit the Smiths as much after that, something about their house still feeling dark. like something or someone was always waiting around the corner, perhaps in a dark room with the lights off and doors shut, just waiting for someone to come by and play again. The Smiths himself moved shortly after, and I never did hear from Amy or Joy ever again. As time goes by, I slowly forget the image I saw in the mirror that day. At this age, all that stays is the bright red color of what I assume were her eyes, searching for us on the other side of the mirror.
So I hope you guys enjoyed that one. I really don't remember my first experience with Bloody Mary because, well, alcoholic beverages. We'll just leave it at that. Our next story comes from McGaffey121. This was actually over on Reddit. The link will be listed in the description in case you guys want to go read it for yourself. So I was driving home on some dark back roads around 3 a.m. when I had the strangest feeling that someone was in my back seat. I turned on the interior lights, but obviously nobody was there. I kept driving while periodically checking my rear view mirror. I came to a stop sign, looked to my left, and saw a man walking down the road with a flashlight in the distance. I turned right. After driving about a half mile down the road, I swear I passed the same man walking with a flashlight. Not 20 yards past the man, I stopped at a red light with no cars in sight, just the man walking down the road toward me. I went through the light. After traveling about another half mile, I checked my rear view mirror and nothing is there. I glanced down at my phone and immediately looked back at the mirror, and there's a semi-truck on my bumper. This truck looks older and is covered in bright amber lights, but the headlights don't seem to illuminate my car. I would think that they would have, considering how close it was. I glanced down again, and when I looked back up, the truck is gone. There was absolutely nowhere for the truck to turn off the road, and even if it did, I would have seen it still in the process of turning in that split second I glanced down. I came to another stop, and where I would normally go straight to continue the dark roads, I decided to take a left and go the longer, well-lit way home. I'm super happy that they made it home safe with no issues. Nothing good happens after 2 a.m., especially on back roads. Our third story comes from someone who wishes to remain anonymous. That being said, it is a bit of a cry for help, so if you do have any information, please email me. My email will be listed in the description, and I will pass it along to the individual who's requesting help. Let's go ahead and get into the story. Where do I begin? Something followed me home from my house to work this morning. I could see glimpses of it in the back seat. The energy didn't feel bad or good, just different. I moved my stuff out of the front seat and told it if it wanted to ride with me, it should sit where I could talk to it, but it stayed in the back seat in silence the entire drive. I've seen a lot of spirits or entities in my life. I've always seen and experienced inexplicable things since I was very small. But recently, like over the past few months, the imagery and sightings have gotten so frequent I can't just ignore it anymore or convince myself I'm making it up. I need advice. A few months ago, the goddess Iris introduced herself in a dream and said she had a message for me, but I wasn't ready to receive it yet. She told me to open my mind and she would return. A week later, I had another dream about Iris, but this time she specified that Hera had sent her, and I had a strange vision. I was veiled, sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a statue of a black and white cow in my lap. The cow was slowly being consumed by gold from the feet up, and I was weeping, grieving. A month later, I had another dream. I was walking along an empty road, and a disembodied voice introduced itself as Gluttony. When I didn't answer, it said, "I am Baal." I did some research into demonology for the second dream because it was so oddly specific, and found out not only is Baal strongly associated with Beelzebub, gluttony, in Christian tradition, but he's also a fertility life deity, which makes this a third dream about a fertility god or goddess I've had this year. This is around the time I started seeing the sigils. I've done a little exploring into witchcraft in the past, like Wicca and such, and I know basically what a sigil is.
but I recently started seeing strange symbols integrated into the logos on signs. I don't know how to describe it except that it's stuff I've seen a million times, but now I can really see it. Like somebody or something is pointing it out to me. The sigil that keeps repeating for me is like a peace sign with 3 circles on each point, minus the big circle encompassing the entire symbol. If anyone knows anything about this, please message me. I've even seen this symbol in sleep. The third and final dream I'll mention is one I had last night. It was an entity that often visited me as a child at my mom's house. A black, endless snake, about 3 or 4 feet in diameter, with a human-esque face painted to be like a clown. The snake entity used to keep me awake for hours as a kid, always saying the same thing. It would call me by my name, and then ask for my name like it didn't know what it was. When I refused to tell it, it would then offer to give me its name. Last night, when I dreamed about the snake again, it called me by my name just like it used to. But instead of then asking me for my name, it just smiled at me and then I woke up. I want to clarify before ending this post that I have never played with any tools like a Ouija board or anything that would intentionally invite spirits or other entities to attach to me. As you can probably tell, I haven't really done any deep research or exploring into demonology either. If anyone can shed any light on these occurrences, I would greatly appreciate it. These entities are beginning to show themselves at work and at home, and I am losing some sleep because of the volume of activity in my house. It comes to us from Mike_RG over on Reddit, entitled, Old Wooden House from My Childhood. In a word of introduction, it happened several years ago. I don't remember the exact date, but we can assume it was around 2007. I was about 8 years old then, but I still remember the whole event until today. At that time, I lived in a family house in the countryside in the southeast part of Poland. You can imagine that post-Soviet vibe. Nobody in the area had internet at home, and the most advanced technology available in the village was the Siemens C60, or another Nokia 3510i, if someone were rich enough. There was also another house in the yard next to our house, old, built entirely of wood, and already then out of use for a long time. From other people's stories, I know that the origins of this building date back to the end of the 1890s. Before the World Wars, that house served as kind of a village nursery and school for children. From my parents' reports, I know my grandparents lived in this place and they themselves remember those years from their childhood. There is no dark secret associated with the building itself that I have ever heard of. Although I must admit that this house has always bothered me. During the day, nothing prevented me from walking freely next to him or even looking inside. However, when it was getting dark, I was even afraid to look at him through the windows of my family house. I felt a lot of stress and anxiety then, but of course, I didn't tell anyone about it. That building was in bad shape as long as I can remember it. Wooden logs were rotten, there were holes in the roof, and the windows were missing glass. These were sealed with old bags, effectively blocking greater part of the light that penetrated inside. I also remember to this day how while playing with a stick and a rotten beam, I found the fragment of a rifle bullet, a few centimeters long, a round piece of metal, crushed at its sharpened part, probably a memento from the First or Second World War. Getting to the story, it was summer, an ordinary sunny day. On days like this, I like to look inside the old house as the light that filled it looked almost magical. There was no darkness. Everything was sufficiently lit by streams of the sun. Back then, I liked rummaging in old cabinets and drawers and playing with the tools I found. At that time, this building served as our private shed, so all household tools were put there so that they would not take up space. I remember going inside and closing the door behind me. Why did I do this? I don't know. I never dared go inside alone with the door closed before. I probably wanted to calm down a bit and look for something interesting in old tools. After a few minutes, it began to seem as if I heard fewer and fewer outside sounds. The noise of the wind seemed to fade away. The birds seemed to wander away, escaping slowly with their singing. And then I heard it.
music seemed to be coming from the attic. A quiet, muffled tune from the gramophone. It sounded like the most typical music of the 20s. There was no one in the house except me. The building also did not have an electrical installation. However, I heard the melody coming from above the ceiling more and more clearly, as if someone were relaxing to the calm beats of a quiet melody. I left quickly from there, and when I was outside, I felt overwhelming, paralyzing fear. I heard the sound of the wind again, the singing of the birds and the sounds typical of the village. However, there was no trace of the music. I have not told anyone from my family about this so far. It seemed unreal to me then, as if it was just a dream. Several years have passed since then, and I can still remember the whole situation very well. It is not easy for me to believe in any paranormal phenomena, but I cannot explain what happened then. Was it real? Or maybe I had a very realistic dream that my childhood mind confused with reality. I have no idea. Now, I've never heard music, but I am certain that I've heard full-blown conversations. It's creepy and eerie, and I can only assume at that age it was terrifying. Now our next story comes from Radio OK 1463. This one's entitled, The Only Unusual Experience I Have Ever Had. This one goes back some 9 or 10 years now. My younger brother and I were home alone. I was 14, 15, so he was 11 or 12. This wasn't unusual. Our parents' shift patterns varied wildly, so this was commonplace in our lives. My grandmother on my mother's side had recently passed away. It is sad to say that I was mostly unaffected by this, as we were never close. She and my mother were estranged, so naturally, so were we. I was in my room and there was a huge bang that came from the kitchen, like pans being dropped and then a cupboard door being slammed. Because I was startled, I instantly ran to my bedroom door and shouted down at my brother to complain about the noise and to tell him to quit it. He then came out of his room across the landing and said it wasn't him, that he assumed it was me. Both clearly confused at this point, we headed downstairs and into the kitchen, only to find that nothing was out of place. We opened cupboards and everything was as it should be. I was ready to chalk it up as my neighbors being loud when we heard a bang come from upstairs. A little unnerved now, we walked back upstairs. The sound came from the front of the house, and as my parents' door was open, that is the room I checked first. This is where I noticed what was out of place. My mother had a vase with some faux flowers in it on the windowsill, which now lay on the floor at the base of the bed and away from the window. Next to my mother's side of the bed, on her side table, she had a photograph of my brother and I when we were very young. He was only a baby in it. That photograph was now face down on the drawers and the frame was cracked. I checked around the house to see if it could have been wind, but there were no windows open. It also doesn't make sense for it to be the wind, as the photograph was covered by a wardrobe. It would have to be gale force winds to even wobble it. I live in the UK, and earthquakes aren't commonplace, and nothing else in this house was out of place. I am very open to the paranormal and supernatural, and I really would like some concrete experiences, as this one is all speculation. I think due to the timing of my grandmother's death and the fact that the age we were in the photograph was probably around the last time she saw us, I am hopeful that maybe it is her way of letting us know that she is watching us in her death, despite her absence in our lives. Just looking for some thoughts and opinions. I know it isn't the most exciting recount, but it's the only thing I've experienced that has made me feel like there was someone watching. Now, I don't think this was a malicious spirit at all, and there are certainly things that go bump in the night, but I think this was just someone who was just letting them know that they were being watched over. Our third and final story comes from Azalea 2812, entitled, The Scariest Day of My Life. Hi. Okay, so when it happened I was 15. I'm a girl, and I'm now 20. I was sleeping at my friend's house, so later that day, it was around October, she said, "Let's do some urbex. There's an abandoned factory near my house." I accepted. So when we were there, I started feeling weird, but I thought that was probably because it was new for me, exploring, blah blah blah. Everything went well, except the fact that I had this feeling of being spied on. After an hour of exploring, there was only one room left to visit, so I asked her, "What is behind that door?" She said, "Oh, nothing. It's the attic, nothing interesting. Also, there's a lot of wasp nests. You shouldn't go there." I was young and stupid, so I replied, "Don't worry, I'll go. And if I see nests, I'll quickly come back." The door was stuck, so I kicked it, and it opened. First thing I saw was wooden stairs. While climbing, I started having this weird feeling even more. It was scaring me a bit, but I was brave. So I looked at what was upstairs, and I could see a room with a big round window. And at that moment, I saw two walls right beside that room. It was round 1 meter wide. And that's when I saw eyes looking at me. I was petrified. I couldn't look away, too scared it could move. After something like 5 minutes staring at that thing, I couldn't see his body. My friend asked me, "Is everything okay?" But I couldn't reply. The thing moved in my direction. That's when I started running on the stairs as fast as I could. I was skipping the steps 4 to 4, too afraid it could be faster than me. I screamed to my friend, "Run, just run." After being back home, I was shocked. We haven't talked about it much. I told her I saw something, but that's all. After months, we needed to walk past the factory to meet one of her friends. I was feeling spied again, but we could hear something following us in the forest. That wasn't fun at all. I could see a shadow here and there, but I chose to ignore it. Why? After leaving the forest, we were on a path in the field of tall grass. I stayed there near the forest waiting for my friend to come back, because the other girl didn't like me at the time. Then I saw a shadow between two big trees, and before I could realize it, that shadow was in front of me in the tall grass. I couldn't see it well, but I was able to see its eyes, looking at me. It was approaching me slowly. I was so scared, writing messages to my friend saying the thing was there. My friend took something like 2 minutes to see my messages, 2 minutes that looked like hours to me. From where she was, she could totally see what was behind the grass. She started screaming my name, telling me to join her as fast as possible. But I couldn't run. I had a feeling if I took my eyes off it, it could be dangerous, even more dangerous than now. So I walked backwards until I was with her, seeing the thing following me, and then it disappeared in a second. I was so scared, so once again, we ran away to her house, locking the doors. When I was in my room, I could hear weird sounds and see shadows. That was a nightmare. I wasn't able to sleep because the sounds were waking me up. I was feeling spied on in my own bedroom. So I tried to talk about it with my friend, and she refused to tell me what she saw. She just said, "It's not important to know what it was, because we won't go there again. Ever." After a while, someone told me to try to speak to that thing, ask it to let me alone, and that I was sorry if I did something wrong. And that's what I did. And since then, I never saw it or heard it again. I was genuinely scared. Sometimes I still feel this weird feeling, but not as much as before. That was my story. I don't know what it was, but I can assure you, I never tried exploring abandoned places again. Everything I wrote happened. I don't mind if you don't believe me, because that traumatized me for years. By Paralycx. Something's watching me in the woods. Before I begin the encounter, I would like to provide backstory. I live in Pennsylvania, and during this particular encounter, I was at my aunt's. She has 3 kids, and her house is about 3 to 5 miles down a remote dirt road off a highway through the rural area. She is approximately 25 minutes away from a store and 35 away from police. And before I start, understand that I do not usually believe in supernatural things. It was about 2 to 4 months ago. I was at my aunt's for a birthday party. Got there around 2 p.m. and by 7 p.m. we were ready to leave. My cousins, her kids, asked if I would stay over because they don't see me very often. I agreed, as I also would enjoy time with them. So, after the party and after everyone had left, it was my aunt, her 3 kids, and her husband and I. My aunt and uncle went to bed around 9:30, 10 p.m. I stayed up with the youngest cousin, who we will call Amy. Amy and I were in the living room watching some Criminal Minds up until about 11 p.m. She decided to go to bed, and I stayed up watching the show. Mind you, it is now pitch black outside and I'm in the middle of the woods. For this factor, they had motion activated lights outside. As I was watching television on the couch, which was against the window, I noticed that the lights outside turns on. My heart is beating, see as it's in the middle of the woods and people should not be around the house. I looked out, and it luckily was just a deer about 20 to 30 feet out by the tree line. Since it was only a deer, I went back to watching my show, and of course the deer was cute. Nothing to be worried about, right? 5 minutes passed by and the lights shut off. Still watching Criminal Minds, I gathered my blankets and pillows to get ready for bed as I was sleeping in the living room that night. As I'm setting the pillows on the couch and laying the blanket down, a sudden bright flash startled me. It's the motion activated lights outside of the living room window. Before I even looked, I thought to myself, it was just a deer again. However, I looked out again reluctantly, but there was nothing there. At this point, it was 11:45, almost midnight, and I'm yawning. I go back to organizing my sleep space, and not even 30 seconds later, I hear something clank the window that I just observed out of. Once again, I turn to check out what the hell just hit the window. And what I saw, I can't even explain rationally. Off to the side by the tree in the yard was the deer again. However, it wasn't the same deer. It looked deformed, almost malnourished stomach, extremely sunken in, and barely any fat on the animal. It just stood there, looking straight at me. It felt like it was staring into my soul almost. This deer, if it could even be called a deer, made me feel extremely unsettled, and I did not feel safe. What I saw next made my stomach sink to my feet. The malnourished deer that made me feel such a foreboding and disturbing feeling contorted and ran off on 2 legs. 2. It went into the woods out of my sight. By this time, I'm absolutely freaking out. My heart is racing, and I'm the only one awake. I immediately closed the curtains, ran to make sure the doors were locked, and I sat away from the window. Trying to process what I had just seen was troubling. No matter how much I thought about it, I could not rationalize what I saw. This deer, literally skin and bone, contorted and folded in ways that are not even capable with normal joint function. The way it ran off on 2 legs, the way it stared at me before all of it happened. I don't understand it. I did not sleep that night. I ended up going to my aunt's bedroom, telling her what I had seen. She did not believe me and told me, "You're just tired, so you're seeing things." I can tell you, with 100% certainty, that I saw what I saw. After that night, I refused to stay at my aunt's anymore, and if we would go there for a party, we made sure we left before dusk. I've heard other stories from locals in the area from when they were hunting. I remember one mentioning a tribe, or a cult, that lived in the area off the beaten path. Maybe it was one of them, and I was just tired. Maybe not. If anyone has had anything similar, please let me know. I feel crazy because I haven't found anything similar, and I can't even talk about it to people because they'll think I'm on drugs. Yeah, I understand how scary being out in the middle of the woods can be, especially if it's unfamiliar. Our next story comes from lilbluemage. As a side note, lilbluemage's page is actually listed as not safe for work or 18+, so please be aware of that. But the story they shared caught my attention, and I wanted to share. It's entitled, Serenaded by the Dogman? Last October, I decided to go hiking each weekend in a different spot related to Michigan folklore. One of those trips was swinging out to Cadillac with a friend to check out the area where the Michigan Dogman originated. Starting at the lake, we took the White Pine Trail about 4 miles out before heading back, all in the bright light of day. The first chunk of the trail is very populated as it takes you out of town. There was even a trail cat belonging to one of the houses off it that came and snuggled us for a bit. But you eventually hit an intersection where the woods kind of start. On our way back, we crossed that intersection, having stopped to check for cars as it isn't a super slow one, and as we finished crossing the street, we both froze. After a few seconds of our own silence, we both started whispering at each other under our breaths. I pulled out my phone and started recording, but the sound didn't happen again, and we eventually carried on our way after a few minutes of hushed speculation. What we heard, specifically, were 3 subsequent howls of varying pitch, a middle note, a higher one, and then the lowest of the 3, all seeming to come from the exact same spot, and all sounding like they came from the exact same creature too. Each howl lasted about a second, like half notes to a song something was trying to sing. In fact, we walked away only half jokingly saying it felt like we had just been serenaded by the dogman himself. We still can't figure out what could have made the sound. It came from a small batch of bush on the northwest corner of the intersection, but there was nothing in there when we looked. And the batch was small, maybe 5 feet deep, with too much empty space on the other side for something to run without us seeing it with ease. Has anyone else in the Cadillac area heard any similar noises? There were no bad vibes or anything while we were experiencing it. If anything, we left the area feeling like something had been trying to play with or delight us a little bit. I'm thinking about visiting again later this year to see if I can hear it again. Definitely a very cool situation. Could be unnerving if you can't find the source of the sound, but the fact that it appeared to be serenading, that's awesome. Our next story is by Crazyturtlemama. It had nowhere to run. My daughter-in-law Athena and I were driving home from the store a few weeks ago, and it had not been dark too long. It's in a rural area in Washington, and so the houses are a little set back with a forest feel. The road we were driving down we had been on a million times, so we know the surroundings very well. I also know to put on my brights so that I can see deer. This was not a deer. As I got halfway down this road, I saw what looked like eyes reflecting off my headlights on the right in the distance, so I started to slow down. This prompted Athena to look up and see why I was slowing down, and she saw this too. As we got closer, we noticed that this thing wasn't shaped like a deer, and it seemed to be on 2 legs. It was tall and gray, with an elongated face, and the eyes were elongated as well, with no nose or mouth that we could make out. Its eyes weren't shining yellow or white, but more like a gray and radiant blue. It stood tall with 2 long arms to its side, and as we slowly passed, it backed up into the tree line staring directly at us. Not at the car, but at us. Athena said, "Wait, what?" as we passed, because there was nowhere for that thing to go, but it was totally gone. That sent shivers and a feeling of uneasiness over both of us for the rest of the night. The next day we got into the car and drove to the exact spot where we saw that thing because we had our doubts, but we were more confused than ever. Not only was there a very tall fence that extended the whole property, but it also had an additional 3-strand razor barb on top, making it impossible to jump over, and the fence was well intact. This being reminded me of something I saw a few years back on a road not too far from this sighting. It was crawling into the bushes on the other side of the train tracks. Every day we passed there, we looked with wonder, and the question we've asked each other was, what do you think would have happened if we had stopped? The question we also have is, was this a living being? Comes from Amherst Doldrums 1890, entitled Haunting Went Dormant, Reactivating Again? When I moved into my boyfriend's house, he told me his former roommates adamantly maintained that the house was haunted. They had both seen and heard multiple inexplicable instances while living there. When I first moved in about a year ago, I definitely noticed a presence in the house for sure. There were 3 major incidents that confirmed the haunting for me. The first was one night when my boyfriend was at work, 3rd shift, so I was home alone from about 11 p.m. to 5 or 6 a.m. Just me and the cat, who was a little wary of me at first, but was happy to have someone to let him in and out at his leisure. One night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, I was watching Netflix and paused because I kept hearing an odd sound. I thought at first it might be the cat, coughing up a hairball. It almost sounded like that, but there was something just off about it. I went into the room the sound seemed to be coming from. The cat has a tendency to slink under the couch when he's feeling particularly unsociable, so I knelt to see if he was ensconced down there. I couldn't see, so I got up and turned the light on. Immediately the wheeze, rasp, or cough stopped. At this point, I saw the cat wedged between the TV and the wall on the other side of the room, and looking absolutely terrified. I scooped him up and brought him in the other room, where he stayed glued to my side for the rest of the night. The second incident was not my sighting, but my boyfriend's. He was coming home from work and pulling up to the front of the house. As he was pulling up to the sidewalk, he claimed that he saw a woman on his front step. She was wearing a long white gown, had flowing black hair. Most disconcerting of all, she was looking straight at him, he said. Our next door neighbor's cherry tree passed between them as he drove past it, and she was suddenly gone. He came in the door looking extremely disconcerted. "Were you just outside?" he asked. I'd been running around trying to get ready to leave for work, having just gotten dressed in clothes that were decidedly not a long white gown. The final incident was really more of a weird series of events. My boyfriend and I were both seeing what we thought was our cat out of the corner of our eye, only to discover him in a completely different room or spot he couldn't possibly have gotten to so quickly from where we thought we saw him. Another odd occurrence was once, just out of morbid curiosity, I left my laptop camera recording when my boyfriend and I went to the grocery store. Upon getting back and reviewing it, there was only one sound that didn't seem like traffic or cat sounds. It was a brief, rumbling little growl. There were also a number of times when our cat went missing only to turn up trapped in the basement. We always make a point of leaving the door open if he follows us in there, which is why this stood out to us so much. We would get home from the store or whatever and find the door closed, and the poor furry fella meowing pitifully to be let out. After that, there was sort of a dormant period, for lack of a better description. We didn't see or hear anything especially strange. However, in the last couple weeks, my boyfriend and I have begun seeing something out of the corner of our eyes again. Yesterday, when I was painting in our sunroom, I looked down to see my water cup sliding across the wooden shelf on my easel. I had brought my laptop in and set it in an empty chair to have background noise. Once when I looked up, I saw the cursor moving across the screen, just out of reach and while I was completely alone in the house. Has anyone else ever lived somewhere that went through phases of dormancy and then seemed to reactivate itself? It definitely is always those little things that go bump in the night. Our next story comes from Monkey Boy 2004. Now, just a side note, this was actually sent to me in a personal DM, so I'm not going to be able to link a page. I had some relatives, not exactly sure of the relation, but they had a house that I'm convinced is haunted. The history I know is that the daughter of the owners of this house dabbled in some Ouija boards and other stuff when she was younger. In the summer of '99, her mother passed, causing a bunch of family members I had never met before to come to town. I was 14 at the time, and a cousin who was around my sister and I's age came around, and we inevitably ended up spending time with him in the house mentioned before. He told us the house was haunted, and I called bullshit, so he invited my sister and I to stay with him there. This was his grandfather's house. His grandmother had just passed away. He claimed the upstairs was the only spot haunted and that nobody ever went up there, but that's where we would stay, and so begins a night I'll never forget. Two things I must emphasize. This was 22 years ago. I was a kid, and it's entirely possible that my cousin was somehow messing with us. That being said, here we go. I honestly don't remember much of the early evening, what we did, or if anything happened, but what I do remember is bedtime. We were all too scared to sleep alone, so we laid awake in the same bed. The first thing that I remember is a pillow that was on the headboard of the bed being thrown against the wall by itself. I remember seeing this. We decided to pick the pillow up, at which point it was launched again. This continued for some time until we stopped picking it up. At that point, I remember we went into the bathroom in a group out of fear and stumbled upon a book called A Ghost Around the House. The homeowner claimed to have no knowledge of this book the next morning when we asked. Once we returned in the bedroom, we laid our heads under the covers, and at one point the blanket was lifted off of us as if someone had grabbed two corners and quickly lifted it up and down, like when you make a bed. The blankets floated down, revealing just our heads. As this happened, the fitted sheet under us was pulled off the bed. At this point, it was about 4 a.m. My cousin decided to grab the pillow again, which frustrated my sister, and she threw it herself off the bed, and at that point it all stopped. I never heard from that cousin again, but the story doesn't end there. Several years later, that homeowner would die, and he chose to spend his last days in that house with his family. At one point, his son left the room to take a minute to himself when he claims that the room filled with a bright light, and he heard what sounded like flapping for several seconds. Once the room clears, his sister walked in to inform him that his father had passed. He would go on to inherit that house and ultimately sell it. Several months after the sale of the house, he received a call from the new homeowner asking if there was something he didn't tell him about the house. He played dumb, but when pressed, he told of his sister's activities when they were younger, and that some believe it to be haunted. At this point, the new owner told him his own story. He said he had started renovations on the house, but had stopped and left several things unfinished for quite some time. And one night, while lying in bed, he felt something grab his legs and he was pulled out of his bed onto the floor. He felt like he was being pushed to finish his work and put the house back together. That's the last I ever heard about the house. So yeah, kind of crazy. That almost sounds a little bit like poltergeist activity. I'm not sure. Our last story comes from QueenOzymandias, entitled, I moved into a house and something is trying poorly to mimic my cat. I moved to my current address a few months ago, and as my family and I were moving in, our upstairs neighbor told us that the house is fairly active for paranormal activity. I didn't really know what to think. I don't consider myself a skeptic or a believer, but there are truly no explanations for the things I've experienced. The first big experience I had in the house was a few days after we started moving in. We were only moving from another city over, so we decided to kind of take our time with the move. My mother and brother had taken the U-Haul back to the apartment to load up belongings, while I stayed behind and started to move the boxes into rooms. I was moving boxes from the living room into the kitchen, and when I looked up to look out the window, I found a man in an old black suit and a hat walking down the sidewalk to the backyard. He didn't look at me, he just walked straight back. I thought at first he was possibly the property manager or owner. I opened up the back door to go and meet him, but he disappeared. That was before the neighbor warned me. He told me that the malicious activity mostly takes place in the basement. Snarls, throwing rocks, scratches. I've only experienced knocking sounds and weird shadows. And his son's bedroom upstairs. He told me his son was dragged out of bed by the ankles. Most of what I've experienced has been in the kitchen. I often hear people walking upstairs in areas that have since been boarded up. There's a staircase that the owners boarded up and turned into a pantry. Stuff is constantly getting knocked off the countertops and thrown to the floor. I was also grabbed once when sweeping the floor. I haven't really given it any attention or tried to contact or communicate because it hasn't really impacted me. A lot of it I just thought was weird and figured it's an old house. Old houses do weird things. Last night was completely different. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I was in bed, trying my best to sleep when I heard something in the living room or kitchen make the weirdest noise I've ever heard in my life. It sounded like a man yelling, trying to mimic a cat in heat. It was not my cat. He's neutered and was asleep at my feet. I mentioned mimicry in the title because sometimes my cat makes yowling noises when he's out in the kitchen. He really likes the way his meowing and carrying on echoes back to him. This was not that sound. It was not a cat outside. I have the windows closed and the air conditioning on. This sound was inside the house. I have no idea what could have made this noise other than something supernatural. It scared the hell out of me, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I'm kind of concerned. I don't know if I should truly be concerned. Is this a sign that whatever entities are in the house are getting bolder? Are they trying to target my cat? I'd love to hear if you have any ideas on what it could be, or if you've experienced similar things, especially what happened after. It comes to us from Acid Rain X, entitled, I stopped a possible school shooting when I was a freshman in high school. This story is 100% true, and honestly the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. At the age of 15, I moved to Southwest Houston. I had moved around for many years, primarily due to being in foster care, and not really having a strong support system or family. Houston itself is somewhat nice, but naturally, I had to be placed in a home in probably one of the most ghetto parts of the city. I was honestly one of the only Caucasian people in the area, which made it somewhat difficult to make friends due to cultural differences and so on. I met a guy named David, who had a girlfriend at the time. We soon became very close, and he became very flirtatious and somewhat protective over me. I also noticed he was deeply involved with drugs and had some major anger issues. I didn't realize how truly mentally unstable he was until after hanging around with him and his girlfriend for a few months. One day, we skipped school and went to the nearest skate park. Naturally, as young burnouts, we just lounged around, smoked weed, spray painted, and kept busting our asses on the ramps at the park. After about 30 minutes, we were approached by several guys wearing fully black clothing. I recognized a couple of them from my biology class. Next thing I knew, they began to attack David. He was thrown onto the ground, being kicked and punched repeatedly. I did my best to try and pry them off David, but that only ended in me receiving several blows to the stomach and several other areas of my body until I could barely get up. That day, we both ended up in an emergency room. David told me not to breathe a word to anyone about what happened, which only created more problems for me, but I listened because for some odd reason, I trusted him. A week later, David found me in the hallway early in the morning before first period. He pulled me to the side and looked around anxiously, his eyes darting back and forth between different parts of the hallway. "What's going on?" I asked, completely thrown off by his sudden erratic behavior. "Those guys are going to pay for what they did to us," he whispered softly. "What do you mean?" I said nervously. "I have a gun. Miranda has one too. I'm going to take care of those fuckers today. Go home," he said through gritted teeth, reaching into his backpack and slowly revealing a black handgun. I quickly placed my hand on his, pushing his hand further down into the backpack. "David, don't let anyone see that," I whispered quickly. My heart was pounding, my head was spinning, and I felt a deep pit in my stomach. My mind raced 90 miles an hour. What the fuck was wrong with him? Why did his girlfriend Miranda have a gun? What the fuck do I do? Fuck. I don't want you to get hurt. I need to protect you. Both of you. I trust you, and I know you won't tell anyone," he said quietly, his eyes softening. My thoughts continued to race, and I did the only thing I could. Try to get away from him and tell someone immediately. "Alright, whatever you're going to do, just wait. Let me get my foster sisters out first, okay?" He nodded, and surprisingly, he let me go. I raced down 2 flights of stairs across the schoolyard and finally made it to the principal's office. I opened the door without knocking, which did piss our school principal off, but I cut him off before he could say anything and said David F. and Miranda H. both have handguns. They both brought guns into the school. A few minutes later, the school was put into lockdown, and my only 2 friends that I had the entire school year were arrested. There were news reports, officers questioning me, and as you can imagine, I was grounded for quite a while for my choice of friends. I later decided to move away from that area because I wasn't sure what would happen to me if they somehow got out while I was still in the area. I don't know if they really planned to use the guns on campus. I just know that I was fucking scared. For me, for the other students, for the faculty. All I know is that maybe I saved someone's life that day, and I don't regret it. I can only imagine how terrifying this was, but the amount of courage this took is monumental. The second story comes to us from James Vagabond, entitled, "I Looked Pure Evil in the Eye." This story is 100% true, and a friend of mine actually is the reason I realized how serious this was and decided to post the story. That part is at the end. Here it goes. So I was talking to an old friend of mine who told me a mutual acquaintance we had, but a man who she thought was a friend sexually assaulted her. I told her how sorry I was, and the stats say it's usually not a random guy. It's a person you're familiar with. But then there are other times like this. So my girlfriend and I go to a pool hall and are drinking and playing pool. We happen to find the only other couple there and link up. Pretty soon it's obvious my girlfriend is way too drunk for a low-key place like this, so we leave with them. The new place is a much smaller front area bar, but back area is spacious and leads to a back alley. The drunkenness is creeping up on my girlfriend. She's getting more sloppy by the minute almost. I go to take a piss, and as I come back I see the couple in the corner kinda looking at me, then looking in my girlfriend's direction. She has found 2 other young women to talk to, but now, also, 2 men have come up and one even has his arm around her. I stay calm, cooler heads always prevail. Walk up, "Hey baby." Then she is like, "Hey baby," all drunk. And the man that had his arm around her, that she didn't even notice, removed his arm. But when he did, he and his friend made eye contact and nodded. I'm eyeballing both of them and I can tell that they have barely spoken to the other girls who already had drinks. They offer to get us drinks. Us as in the table. Again, the other girls have drinks. I try to decline, but my sloshed girlfriend is thinking it's nice. One guy comes back with a drink for me and one for my girl. Nobody else was given drinks by these men. Hands my girlfriend hers first, then mine. As she starts to lift it, I put my hand over it and whisper, "You've had enough. You're all done." Then as these 2 creeps look at me, raise my cup, I obviously drop it right on the guy's shoe who gave it to me and go, "Oops. Not I'm sorry, not my bad." And he looks right into my eyes and says, "Oh, it's okay. I'll get you another," with the most sinister look I've ever seen. We both knew what him and his friend or relative were doing. They looked alike. More on that later. So I then grabbed my girlfriend very hard and said, "We're leaving now. If you try to make a scene, I'm going to pull out a knife and kill anyone that tries to separate us. I will pick you up and run. We have to leave now, baby. Trust me." And she kind of just understood through her drunk state how serious I was. I was so scared she was going to cause a scene, have the bouncer toss me and be alone with those wolves. I was scared of us getting separated. We got home and I cried. I remember that the last 100-foot walk to our car in the dark, holding her up. So glad we didn't drink any of the last drinks we were offered that were clearly spiked with the drug. Now back to before. This happened in the town of Lodi, California. A small town. I did not recognize, nor did these men seem to know anyone. Both Arabic, well-dressed, decent looking. So I tell my friend this, and she gasps. The neighboring town Stockton had the same thing happen. A lot. Successfully. At this bar called Rooftops on Sunday. They had flyers warning people about them and a description. There was a Facebook page dedicated to identifying these men and a hotline for tips. These guys were pure evil. They were going to drug us, toss us, and God knows what else to my sweetheart. I shudder thinking about it. If I had been just a little more drunk, a little more off, less sharp that night, what could have happened? I can only imagine the scenarios that played out in his head. Well done for keeping your head about you. Our last story comes from SkeetsDatadroid, entitled The Home Invasion. Several years ago, I was involved in a car accident that caused some minor spinal injuries, mostly swelling that resulted in partial paralysis. Not able to return home due to us living in an apartment on the second floor with no elevator, I became a resident at a physical therapy rehabilitation center. After finally regaining the ability to walk, aided by my walker, and moving around in a wheelchair, it was decided that I would get my own place using Section 8 housing. After much searching, I found a nice spot, a ground floor condominium in a relatively safe part of town. The one-room condo had a wide living room with attached kitchenette and a wide hallway leading to the bedroom in the back of the place. With my family's help, I was all moved in and ready to begin living independently for the first time. After a great first meal in my own place, pizza from a local restaurant, I decided to go to bed. As days turned to weeks, I began to learn the ins and outs of life in this condo complex, and for the most part, everything was fine, except for the skeevy guy who would often be seen prowling around, who I later learned was the brother of one of my neighbors. Said sleazeball was a perpetually recovering meth addict who would live with his brother whenever his girlfriend would throw him out of their apartment. Upon learning this news, my father came to see me one evening out of the blue. After a nice dinner, he asked me if I still had my concealed carry permit, and me, being a proud supporter of the Second Amendment, answered in the affirmative. However, my gun was still in storage and not yet in my possession. He smiled and reached into his bag and presented me with a housewarming present, an X-Tac Elite Carry Comp, one of his favorite pieces from his collection. After bidding my father a fond farewell, I decided to retire to my bedroom, and after watching YouTube videos on my Fire TV, decided to fall asleep. A few weeks go by, and I largely forget about my new toy, having stashed it in the drawer next to my bed, until the day in question. I had to do some grocery shopping, and after calling for my transportation, a company called Veo that offers free rides for the disabled, I go to the store and buy my groceries for the week. And after thanking the driver for helping me bring them inside, I pack them away and once again retire to bed. Several hours later, I wake up to a noise that sounds like scratching at my bedroom door. Opening it, I see nothing, but hear it further down the hallway, and it hits me that someone is trying to pry the door open. Slowly closing the bedroom door, I fish in the drawer for my gun, and taking it out of the holster and placing it at my side with the safety off, I slowly roll down the hallway to the kitchen, just in time to hear the door give way. A flashlight beam scans the interior just in front of the door as the shadowy silhouette of the intruder enters. Needless to say, he is surprised when I flip on the lights and he finds himself bathed in the fluorescent glow of the overhead lights. He looks at me shocked at first, and then remembering that he's got a knife and I'm seemingly a helpless guy in a wheelchair, his eyes suddenly grow to the size of saucers as I produce my gun from the chair beside me and fire, hitting him center mass. He drops his knife and heads screaming outside the door and collapses on the ground feet away. I hear his labored breathing, most likely from a collapsed lung, and grab for the phone to call the police. As I'm on the phone with them, other residents, probably woken by either the shot or the subsequent scream, emerge from their condos to see the potential robbers splayed out on the lawn. The police soon arrive and render emergency first aid to the guy before paramedics arrived and took over. I give my statement to the police, and they of course have to take my gun in as evidence, which I begrudgingly hand over. I later get it back after the shooters ruled self-defense. Yippee. Come to find out sometime later that my late night visitor was the sketchy brother of my neighbor. The police said that he confessed to planning on robbing me because, quote, cripples are easy targets, his exact words. The cop who told me this looked at me and smiled slyly, saying that he chose the wrong cripple, I guess, with a reassuring pat on the shoulder. As for the brother who was my neighbor, he and his girlfriend were encouraged to move out. and I was thankful to see them go because a new tenant moved in soon afterward, a much better person if I do say so myself. The drug addict brother survived, and last I heard he was in prison with a 5-year sentence for armed robbery in the first degree. Today's first story comes to us from LMK2305, entitled Scary Cemetery Experience in Australia. A few friends of mine were into exploring abandoned places and checking locations out. Whether it's a rundown shack in the middle of nowhere or an abandoned building, we were always eager to take a look around. We don't vandalize or destroy property. We only take a look. One day, I find out that one of the cemeteries in my area is apparently haunted. It borders an old abandoned mental hospital, and the cemetery was the burial ground for some of the unfortunates who died at that place. The asylum is 150 years old, and it was a horrible place for those who were housed there. All up, there were 4 of us. After 20 minutes of driving, we get out and search for the cemetery. After about 10 to 15 minutes of looking on maps and walking up and down the neighborhood, we finally come across the cemetery's entrance. It was around 11 p.m. when we go to the cemetery. It was very quiet, barely any cars on the street, and all I could hear was the distant dogs yapping about. All 4 of us start heading into the cemetery. We were taking this slow and using our eyes and ears to catch anything suspicious. As we're walking, I hear a faint laugh coming from the trees below. It sounded like a child. I first wrote it off as a dog barking in the distance or just something explainable. As we continue down the track further, I hear the child laughter again. I turn to my friend who turns to me and we both just stare at each other. We both heard the same thing coming from the woods below, and we were just spooked, but that didn't stop us. We pushed on, going further into the cemetery and towards the trees. We eventually ended up getting too scared and decided to turn around and walk back. I was positioned with another friend of mine about 2 meters behind my other buddies. All of a sudden, I hear heavy footsteps walking toward us on our right. I'm not kidding when I say this, but these footsteps just started picking up pace and we could hear these loud thumping footsteps just galloping at us. We panicked like crazy because we are looking directly at the sound and nobody is there. It was too loud to be some sort of critter, and it definitely wasn't another person. I am now 18, and I no longer urban explore places as it's too risky and I can risk heavy fines. I'm quite a skeptic, and I'm all ears for any logical explanation. Thanks. Yeah, I think my response would have been the same. Always better safe than sorry. The second story comes to us from ItzaMoby, entitled, Moved into an apartment 3 months ago. The last 2 days, things happened that I can't explain. So I'm going to preface this with a little background. I'm a firm believer in life beyond death and other paranormal entities. Growing up, my mother managed a local library that had all kinds of activity. It got to the point where she hired investigators to stake out the library for the night, and they actually found stuff. I've seen apparitions, heard voices, all the good stuff. While I've had a lot of paranormal experiences, I don't know a lot of the extra stuff, like what certain paranormal behaviors mean and such. Thus, I'm going to share my latest experience with you, Reddit. Like the title states, my wife for school had to move to a new city. We moved into a new apartment 3 months ago. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of background for the place we moved into. It's an older house that, if I had to guess, would have been built in the early 1900s. My wife and I inhabit the 2nd and 3rd floors with our 2 cats. We live primarily on the 2nd floor, and with the 3rd floor having 2 small rooms. One of the rooms we use as a hobby room. I have a personal office there, and my wife has a craft area. The other room we call the Red Room. Floor to ceiling is painted red. The room was filled with rat poop when we moved in, and it smells awful. We cleaned the room and now use it for storage. Since the time we moved in, everything has been quite pleasant. There have been a couple odd occurrences that I've been able to debunk, mostly. Some objects being located in strange spots that I blame my wife's forgetfulness for, or some footsteps at odd hours that I attribute to the downstairs neighbor with an unconventional work schedule. But something happened 2 nights ago. This is not easy to explain away. I went upstairs 2 nights ago to partake in the gaming session on my computer and noticed the Red Room's door ajar. Now this door isn't the simple latching door. The door is held shut with a hook and eye latch. This was installed prior to us moving in. We leave that door shut as it's not cat-proofed and we don't generally need to go in there. Now one singular occurrence of this didn't raise any real alarms, as I just assumed my wife needed some kitchen utensils we had stored in there. I figured I'd remind her later to close it, and that would be that. Now for my job I work overnights, So last night, I worked all night and got home this morning. My wife was in a rush to get to work and left her tablet in our hobby room. She asked that I run up and get it. As I crested the stairs up to the 3rd floor, I noticed that once again the door was ajar. I latched the door, grabbed my wife's tablet, and went downstairs. I asked her if she had been in the red room recently. She said she hadn't been in there in a couple weeks. She must have seen the look on my face after her response, because she asked why. I informed her of the door, and she seemed concerned. Now, my wife isn't a believer in the paranormal, so she wasn't too concerned. Still trying to debunk the door thing, I moved a massage table in front of the door in case there was something living in the walls, as you see in horror movies. A couple hours passed and a friend of mine head off for the day and asked if we could play games. Now, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little spooked at this point. Now, this friend believes in the paranormal, so I shared the story and told him I was going to video chat with him as I went upstairs in case anything moved. So I did, and I'm glad I did. The massage table and door were how I left them, but I have a portable AC in the hobby room that I only turn on when I'm in the room. When I was up earlier to close the door, I recall it being off. My friend was witness. He heard the AC on and saw me turn it off. This is my story, Reddit. What should I do? And should I be concerned? I personally don't feel it's malevolent, as I feel it would have done something far more drastic by now. But I also don't understand the sudden uptick in activity. So at this point, I'm overtired, but not sure if I was going to sleep until my wife gets home. So I may or may not respond to comments right away. But I plan to. I will also post updates. These are always difficult situations because I know I do a lot of things that I forget. But there are times that I am 100% certain I know it wasn't me. Our last story comes to us from FalkenDagenhart, entitled The Night I Got Possessed. I'm writing this story a few hours after it happened, and an hour after I was told about it myself. I just woke up like a totally normal morning, except that when I hit the living room, my parents are looking at me with a worried look. Apparently, tonight at 6 a.m. I woke up. I sleep in a 2nd floor room that opens to a small hall where the stairs and all the doors in the rooms are located. As my parents told me, I walked out of my room and stood in this hallway for a solid 10 minutes while muttering to myself. My parents were talking to me, thinking I was sleepwalking and trying softly to wake me. They didn't try to wake me up more loudly because I was close to the stairs and they didn't want to risk me waking up scared and yeeting myself down the stairs. After 10 minutes, I apparently walked to a dressing room where we have a full-body mirror, sat in front of it and began talking to it, as if I was arguing with someone in the mirror. Though, and this is what freaked me out the most, I was not speaking in my language, or any other language for that matter. I was speaking gibberish and grunting with my throat. Apparently this happened for 5 or 10 minutes. I still wasn't responding to their attempts of waking me up, but after I finished, I stood up, I bowed to the damn mirror, and went back to bed, crashed on it, and immediately started snoring. I have absolutely no recollection of any of this happening. And safe to say my parents are unsettled to say the least. Oh, and we are taking down the bloody mirror. Nope. There might be a logical explanation for whatever the frick happened to me last night, but I'm having breakfast and writing this with the biggest feeling of dread. Top-Frag, entitled The House on Lake Road. This is going to be fairly long. I'm not sure why I never looked to Reddit to post this, but here I am about 9 years later to recollect my encounter. People in high school had always talked about this house out in the country that was abandoned and badly burned. The story was there was a high schooler getting high and drunk upstairs years ago, and some other kids showed up and burned the building down. Unsure if they knew he was inside or not, and if it was just for fun or if they were being malicious. Anyway, my brother, along with our friends Dylan and John, got into John's car and decided to check it out one night. Along the way, we picked my girlfriend at the time up at her mom's house for the adventure. Remember this final detail, as it is important later. We finally got to the house after traveling down a gravel road for what felt like forever. At first, we just parked out front, taking it all in. It was pretty creepy and just didn't feel right. We eventually worked up the courage to go inside. We got out of the car, turned on our flashlights, and went in. It was all so quiet because we were so freaked out and no one said a word. Until Dylan jokingly yelped and we all jumped, then laughed, but then heard a thud. We all stopped and agreed it sounded like it came from upstairs. My brother pounded a wall next to us once, and there was a response from above, a similar bang of the same intensity, almost an echo.
We banged again and there was another in return, so we stopped and agreed we should probably leave. Then it got weird. As we left, we heard repetitive thuds from above us, over and over and over again, scaring us out of the building. We ran to the car and sped away. You'd think it'd end here under the guise of a homeless person, or another friend coaxed into hiding and scaring us, but it's not the case. We dropped my girlfriend back off at her house and drove the last 10 minutes to Dylan's grandma's place. She was out of town for the weekend, so we planned to game it out and mess around there before any of this was planned. We pulled into the driveway, got out of the car, and circled to examine it. We heard stories from others that there'd be handprints on their cars after they check. What we found was worse. The word "die" wiped into the car by someone's hand on the passenger side. As we found this, my girlfriend called my cell phone. "Hello? Are you guys fucking with me?" hysterically. What do you mean? We just got home. The word "die" is on my mirror in the bathroom, and it's all foggy. What the fuck? No, we aren't fucking with you. Stay with your brother or mom, and I'll talk to you soon. Like I said, this was years ago, but I distinctly remember not telling her about our die message as to not freak her out. Thought it might be better if she thought her brother was fucking with her or something. Hindsight, maybe that wasn't the best idea, but I was panicked. At this point, we went into the house and agreed no one goes anywhere alone. And of course, right when we got into the house, John said he needed his phone from his car to tell his friends about this. We leaned on the whole idea, no one goes anywhere alone thing, and I agreed to go back outside with him. Right before we got to the car, there were 4 clicks and each door locked. We sprinted back inside to find Dylan complaining of his arm burning before we could even tell him what happened. He ran it under the sink as we thought maybe he brushed up against something poisonous by the house. He went to dry his arm with a towel, and when he pulled it off, "die" was also scraped into his arm. After this, things started to calm down. We played games and tried to ignore it all. I can't remember how I calmed my girlfriend after all this, but I think she went to stay at a friend's house for the night and was convinced her brother messed with her. This is the only time I've ever felt in danger by something I cannot see or explain. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Be safe. The second story comes to us from BurntSchmidt, entitled, "You Found My Toe." I was walking through the woods with my dog at the tail end of winter when he decided to stop. He was sniffing around much longer than usual, and despite my commands, wouldn't move from sniffing in one specific spot on the ground. When my tugging at the leash with all my strength wasn't working, I investigated what had him so curious. Wet leaves were piled ankle high everywhere among the muck, but then I sifted through it all and I found something undeniably jarring: a severed toe. I'll never forget, nor can I describe the fear I felt in that moment, not knowing who was around me, how this happened, or if we were in danger. I recall my heart palpitating and just how much more frigid the cold sweat made me. I told Max we had to go home. It was already evening and soon it would be dark. My senses heightened. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire way home, with the dread of eyes watching and plotting from afar. I swore I heard something following us, but whoever or whatever it was, they remained hidden. Soon it was night. Frost was drawing from both our breaths, and the back of my house was just over the other side of the tree line about 100 yards away. And that's when I heard the dreaded sound of footsteps over whooshing leaves and cracking sticks in pace with my stride. I'm a pretty big guy. People don't generally mess with me. None would follow a guy my size with a 120-pound German Shepherd. Whoever it was had to either be crazy or armed, or worse, it could have been a large bear, which would have been all the more precarious. Max and I started to run. We were practically sprinting, and soon we were about to break through the trees when Max halted, me nearly sliding backwards, and began to growl. Once again, I couldn't get him to move, but this time he was really pulling. And then he did something which was completely and utterly unlike him. He hid behind me and began to whimper, like he saw what I couldn't, and became instantly frightened. And then, not but a few feet in front of me, something made me want to jump out of my skin. A voice said in almost a whisper,
"Do you have my toe? I've been looking for it."
The voice that spoke didn't sound like a woman or man, but something in between. I never saw it. My dog pulled with all of his might for us to go home. The hair standing all over my body, we did just that. I spent the rest of the night looking out the windows. When I was in bed, I did notice the floodlights in the backyard turning on and off repeatedly, but I didn't go down to see what it was. I can't account for anything that happened that night. All I can say is that we found another place to walk. Whoever or whatever it was, they just didn't seem to be living. Maybe it was a person, but that would mean they'd have had to silently follow me for 3 miles all the way to my house. That's just demented. But something struck great fear in me that night. If only I'd have looked outside, I might have been relieved that it was just a kid playing a prank, and that maybe the toe was fake. But finding that thing was a 1 in a million shot, so I have to disagree with the hoax theory. The end. Our last story comes to us from KittyKatHasClaws, entitled, Not All Guests Are Welcome. I have been working for an independent hotel for just over 4 years now. We're the #1 rated hotel in our city and proud of it. I mostly work in housekeeping, but I've done some time at the front desk as well. I love my job, and have always said that my bosses are great. Now, being a housekeeper, I've seen some things. I've seen a room where someone snuck in their dog, kitten, chickens. We don't allow pets. I once had a room that I was cleaning as a stayover that had tripods set up around the bed, professional camera equipment cases, an adult-sized pacifier, on site, and extra large-sized child's diapers. The 2 people that were in that room were in their early 20s. I even had a room once that we had to call the cops on for a raid because we found meth. They found a lot of drugs and guns in that room. But today is the first time I've ever actually felt scared to be in a guest's room. As I'm working on a room that's already been vacated, a man in the next room over catches me at my supply cart. He's set to be staying for several days and tells me, "You can go ahead and clean my room now. I'm going down for breakfast." Excellent. I love getting my stayovers done early on. It makes things easier for people working laundry. The sooner we get the dirty laundry down to them. So I pop over into his room, opening it up and propping the door open with the stopper like we always do. The first thing I noticed is that he has around 20 prescription bottles lined up on one of the 2 beds, along with insulin and needles. I'm nosy, I'll admit it, and I wanted to see what he was on. Oddly, it was only 2 different types of medication for all 20 bottles. About 2/3 were diabetes medication, and the rest were a cholesterol medication. That's a little weird that he has so many bottles of the same meds, but whatever. I go to make the bed and see that some of the bedding has been stained, and sigh, knowing now I'll have to change all the bedding instead of just being able to turn down the sheets and blanket. So I leave the room, closing it behind me to get the linens I need, and then head right back to the room. I prop the door open again and head to set the clean linens on the desk chair when I see out of the corner of my eye 2 notes sitting on the TV armoire. It wouldn't mean anything except I caught the word "kill" scrawled on it. I dropped the linens and took a closer look. What I read on the first note made my blood run cold. You don't have to forgive her, you just can't kill her. You are here to take money and alcohol away from you. Get over having to kill her and you can safely leave. My heart was pounding. My eyes went to the second note, which just looked like a to-do list at first, but in the end made my stomach churn. Spray and wash. Apply for Medicare. Insubordination. The soul is healed by being with children. Bank card follow-up. Inheritance. Savings. Pop 10,500. Map Montana. There will be a day of reckoning. Did you tell Mom what I said? How did Bev get my address? It was too much. I quickly snapped pictures of them on my phone so I could show my boss why I would not clean his room. I left the room quickly, closing it up behind me. As the door closes, I turn and I see the man just 10 feet away from me, coming back to his room. My heart is in my throat, but I manage to smile and tell him, "I need more supplies. I'll be back to your room in a bit." I take off straight for the elevator, having noticed our maintenance man waiting for the slow transport. In a hushed tone, I tell him what I found, and he sees I'm shaken. Not a normal state for me. He rides down with me, and I go straight to my boss and tell her that for the first time in all these years, I am not comfortable being in a guest's room. I show her the pictures, and her face is still and pale. She goes to the front desk and asks our general manager for a minute of her time and brings her into the office to show her. She agreed, This was not a safe situation, and she took our maintenance man with her to go inform the man that he had 1 hour to get his belongings and leave the hotel, and he was not welcome back. I spent a few minutes in the laundry room trying to calm down. Then my boss went back up with me to the floor until the man was officially out of the hotel. I don't know who Bev is. I don't know who the woman is that he didn't feel he needed to forgive. But man in room 422, let's never meet again.
Running Horse 94, entitled Gettysburg Ghost. The pictures you're about to see were provided by Running Horse. These are actual photos from the location. In late fall of 2015, me and my family decided to go to Gettysburg for vacation. Being a big history lover, I was stoked to see the battlefield. The weather was amazing and the atmosphere was somber and peaceful. The first day was mostly spent at the museum and walking parts of the battlefield. Nothing really happened until we were getting ready for bed in the hotel room. My brother sat up suddenly in bed and ran to the door, opening it and stepping into the hallway. We asked him if he was okay, and he asked us if we heard men yelling orders and cannon fire. We had 4 people in the room, and no one else heard anything. The next day, while we were on the battlefield near Devil's Den, it felt as if someone was constantly following behind us, even though no one was there. That second night, as we got ready for bed, there was cannon fire, and this time, we all heard it, including some of the other guests who came out into the hallway. The third day, we were at Little Round Top, and I decided to crawl between some rocks to get a perspective of what the sharpshooters would have seen. While laying on my stomach, I felt someone lay a hand on my shoulder and whisper in my ear, "I see him." At first I thought it was my brother until I heard him call my name from a statue that sits off to the side. It was so odd. After that, I kept feeling as if I would turn around and bump into someone. It got to the point I turned around, and I felt extremely cold, as if I had walked into a freezer. My mother, who was beside me, also noticed the temperature difference and commented how odd it was. Later that evening, about an hour before the sun went down, me and my mom took the car to see a couple things and take some pictures. We were at high water mark and thinking about what could have been going through those poor men's thoughts. It brought tears to our eyes, and we both heard a man say, "Don't cry for me, lass." The atmosphere shifted and it felt extremely peaceful and relaxing. It was as if whoever it was trying to comfort us. We both sat there for a while until it was time to go. As we walked back to where we parked the car, there was a couple sitting beside their car. They said hello and we had small conversation, and in mid-conversation we all stopped talking. From the battlefield we all heard fifes and drums. The couple seemed unnerved and they got up, said goodbye, and got into their car. We decided that it was time to leave since it was almost dark and no one should be on the battlefield at night. Our last day there, we toured Eisenhower's home, and then toured Big Round Top. Eventually, my brother and father wanted to go back to the hotel, so we took them back. We decided to go back to Big Round Top, seeing as it was our last day to explore. We parked the car and walked into the forest. We had about 2 hours before the sun set, and no one was around. About 20 minutes into the hike, my mom stopped, and I was about to ask what was wrong when I heard footsteps. There were multiple footsteps that we could hear, and they stopped. Then, when we started walking again, the footsteps would start up again. At one point, we decided to turn back, and my mother needed a rest, so we sat on a boulder. It suddenly got quiet, to the point there were no crickets, birds, or any other forest sounds. Then all at once, we heard horses snorting and trotting and galloping past us. Then it full-on sounded like we were in the middle of a battle. Bugles sounding, clashing of swords, muskets firing, and lots of men yelling. We were in complete shock, and it lasted for a couple minutes. Then it all stopped. We started talking about what we had just witnessed, and then heard several men call out,
"Help! Help me! I don't want to die!"
and crying. It was so overwhelming that we booked it back to where we parked the car, and when we got to the car, a park ranger was there. He took one look at us and asked, "What did you all see or hear?" We explained what had happened, and he told us that he had stopped a man he thought was a Union soldier reenactor. He had told him he wasn't allowed on the battlefield after dark. He said the man smiled and with a shrug carried on. He said he was about to stop him again when the soldier walked through a tree and disappeared. We went back to the hotel, and the next morning we were eating our breakfast in the dining room area before checkout.
Me, my mother, and brother heard a bugle playing, but no one else in the dining area seemed to hear it. It was all a bunch of strange events, but we did go back and we had even more experiences the second time. We have several pictures where you can clearly see soldiers on horseback and soldiers around the different spots on the battlefield. If you get a chance, it's a great place for history and the paranormal.
The second story comes to us from Valkyrie5672. The Shadow at My Cabin.
First of all, excuse my English. I don't usually write or talk English, therefore it's not that good. Now, to what I experienced. I think it was maybe around 3 years ago. I remember it was winter because it was really cold and snowy outside. I was left alone in me and my family's cabin while the others went Christmas shopping for food and last-minute packages for some friends or something. I don't really remember why they went out, but that's not so important. My point is, I was all alone in our cabin playing some games on my phone while listening to some music on the radio in my room on the first floor of the cabin. I remember that I suddenly got cold and went to get a blanket that was on our sofa. Just when I was about to get up and grab the blanket, I saw some kind of shadow in my side vision. I didn't really care that much because I thought that maybe it was just my imagination playing a trick on me, because I really didn't like being alone in general, and especially not in a cabin on a mountain in the middle of winter. I got the blanket and went back to my room to play some more games. About 1 hour passed and I had forgotten all about the strange shadow, but then I saw it again. This time it stayed in my side vision for about 3 to 5 seconds before it went away again. I got a little creeped out about it since I was the only one in the cabin at the moment. Therefore, I decided to lock the door to my room. Right after I locked the door to my room, I heard some kind of crying upstairs on the second floor of the cabin. At first, I thought it was my little sister, who was about 3 years old at the time. She used to cry a lot, and I asked out loud, "What's wrong? Did you hurt yourself?" I heard her answer, "Yes, I fell while playing with my dolls. Can you come upstairs and help me?" I unlocked my door and headed towards the stairs when it finally hit me. I was alone in the cabin, so whatever the fuck was upstairs could not be my little sister. I sprinted out of the cabin wearing only a t-shirt and my dad's slippers, and it was freezing cold outside. I stopped running about 150 meters from my cabin and looked at it from a distance. In one of the windows on the second floor, I could see a shadow just standing still. I got the feeling it was staring at me, even though I could not make out any eyes. I stood there outside my family's cabin in the freezing cold, maybe about 30 minutes, and cried until my family finally arrived. My mom and dad asked me what was wrong, but I didn't want them to think I was crazy, so I just made up a story. I don't remember what I told them, but they seemed concerned about me. One thing I remember is that I talked my mom and dad into driving me to my grandparents' cabin because I refused to enter the cabin. Ever since that day, I refuse to join my family when they go to our family cabin. It's really hard to explain, but the feeling I got that day in the cabin can only be described as not wanted, like someone or something wanted to harm me, and I have nightmares about the shadow figure thing even today. It's haunting my dreams. If anyone on Reddit have experienced something similar, or might have any idea what this thing is and how I can stop having nightmares about it, can you please leave a comment? I would really appreciate any advice you guys have.
Our third story comes to us from Snoo Suggestions 6709, entitled, The Top Hat Man That Plagued My Early Childhood. The pictures you're about to see are the actual photos of the drawings.
For context, this haunting, I guess I'll call it, happened from about 6 to 10 years old or so. I lived in a relatively new home in a small neighborhood in western Massachusetts. I had a loving family, and apart from what I will talk about here, a normal childhood. I'll start by saying I don't remember too much from my early childhood, but these experiences stand vividly in my mind as if they happened yesterday. It started off when I was about 6, with terrifyingly vivid reoccurring nightmares. Nightmares that seemed out of place for a young kid who was never allowed to be exposed to violence or horror content. One common one included me trying desperately to jump on my bed while a large snake slowly approached me from the hallway. I would feel pure and unadulterated terror as it keeps getting closer and eventually struck me, to which I would wake up in a sweat. One of the worst ones is where me and my father would be standing in front of a hallway that branched off to the left and led into my parents' room. 5 to 10 humanoid-like creatures would bound out of the darkness of the hallway and proceed to eat both me and my father alive. I could hear him screaming as they reached him, and when they eventually reached me, I would wake up tingling where the humanoids had first bit down onto me. Keep in mind, I was very young when these dreams began, but they persisted for the next 4 years. Now, dreams alone are not enough for me to get on Reddit for the first time and pour out my childhood trauma to strangers. I remember I began to feel like I was being watched in my bedroom at night. It seemed like the darkness in my room became oppressive and I would be filled with pure dread and terror. Although I didn't know what, it felt as if something was about to happen. Like every molecule in that room had stopped moving at once. This is when I first saw him. My bed was situated to where my head was against a wall and the foot of my bed pointed towards a window. To the right was the door leading into my room on the same wall as my head was against. Just to the left of that was a door on the adjacent wall leading into a Jack and Jill bathroom I shared with my sister. There was just enough light from the window that I could see the outline of a tall black figure with the outline of a top hat sitting on its head. I don't fully remember what his face looked like, as this was at least 10 years ago, but I do remember seeing some sort of liquid reflecting light where his face would have been. I quickly ripped the covers over my head and sat there frozen with terror, unable to move. This went on for many, many months. Every time that sense of dread filled me, I knew he was there, but would not dare look for fear that he would attack me. There were a few times I was so convinced I was not going to make it, I screamed for my parents and they always came running to find nothing. My dad would always tell me, "Who's the scariest thing in this house?" To which I would lie and tell him it was of course my strong Gusto father. He always assured me nothing would happen to me while he was there, but I knew if this thing wanted to do me harm, there was nothing he could do. Up to this point, by about 8 years old, the nightmares had become more graphic and appearances more frequent. Always feeling up that doorway, just standing, watching. Up to this point, I had never been physically touched or attacked by it. That was until one night I was bunkered down beneath my sheets, and that familiar feeling of dread washed over me. I froze in my bed with the same feeling of anticipation, only this time something would finally happen. There was a scraping noise that I could tell came from the bathroom, and suddenly, my leg was grabbed through the covers. I freaked out, bawling, crying, and beelined to my parents' room where I stayed for the night. I was never touched again, but he was there most nights until we moved states when I was 10. Of course, I tried to explain what was happening to me, but it was always brushed off, and I eventually stopped talking about it, as no one believed me, and I did not want to scare my little sister any more than I had already. Fast forward to 2 years ago, when I was 18, sifting through old storage boxes filled with my old school drawings and notebooks my parents had kept. I was flipping through a school notebook filled with grammar practice and such when my heart sank. There, on my school notebook, was a drawing of the Top Hat Man. I practically shoved it down my parents' throats while shouting, "See, I told you it's that fucking Top Hat Man." My parents went pale and profusely apologized for not believing me. They even went as far to ask me if I needed counseling. In reality, I was relieved that I had some proof, and today, I absolutely love horror as a genre. I guess maybe because it gives me a feeling of control I never had as a kid. If anyone has any questions or insights to offer me, be more than welcome. If you had a similar experience, please tell me about it. I'm going to try and attach the pictures I took of my elementary school notebook, but like I said, it's my first time posting here and I'm still not entirely sure if I'm doing this right. And our final story comes to us from Lindsay2983, entitled, Family Curse or Demon Entity. Hello everyone. I am hoping to get some advice or feedback in regards to my situation. My father's side of the family has a lot of mental illness and bad history. My father and his sisters, my aunts, grew up in a home that was absolutely from a horror movie. The paranormal activity was so bad. My dad told me stories of him seeing people walk towards him with their arms reaching for him every night in his room. Absolutely traumatic things. His father, my grandpa, was very sick mentally, and his mother was always bedridden with illness. It was a rough childhood for them. My aunts have always told me that we have a family curse that would affect all women in our family and cause them to die young and make them really ill. I always believed their scary stories, but in regards to the curse, I always rationalized it as just mental illness that plagued our genetics. As I've gotten older, I am starting to realize that there is something to this. As a child, I was always very aware of things around me.
I was having paranormal experiences as a young child that were terrifying, and nightmares that I can still remember vividly to this day. I always became very aware of some kind of special ability I had as a child. I would sometimes get a feeling and already know what was going to happen. I was dreaming things that would happen later on. I knew that I was very in tune with the paranormal. As I got even older, I began to notice that everywhere we moved, or if I was with any of my family, we had severe paranormal hauntings no matter where we were. My aunt's home was absolutely horrifying, and my experiences there are still very traumatic. This still happens to this day. Anyway, recently things have kicked up in high gear in paranormal activity. A few months ago, my aunt and I decided to write a book about our life and family experiences to help us heal from the trauma. Right after we began our research to write a book, horrifying, evil entities started to terrify different members of my family. My parents, my sister, my aunts, and my family. We had to immediately stop our research and focus on getting help with whatever evil thing that started to attack us. We had to call a local church for help. This was back in January of this year. My daughter is now claiming to see monsters in our house. Last night, I had a weird moment, an epiphany. What if this curse is a real thing? What if our family had a demon attached? What if this is more than that? I'm not sure what to do with this new place I am in, and I feel this is the only possible safe place to talk about this. Maybe I need a medium or someone that can tell me what this is. I am concerned for my family. This curse has claimed lives of my family, allegedly as my family had claimed, and some stories I have are very sad. And I don't know whether I should be worried or if I'm just getting old and more traumatized from my experiences than I realize. Today's first story comes to us from Lay_DE, entitled, Driving Around and Ended Up Seeing a Vampire Beast. I have a few paranormal encrypted stories after moving to North Carolina. The silver UFO, the shadow person, the six lights, etc. Please let me know if you would like to hear them. But this one stuck out to me the most. I have never even heard of this thing, or even knew that it existed, and I was a kid when I saw this thing. It could have been my mind exaggerating, but another person with me saw it, and it freaked us both out. Driving along the old back roads of North Carolina, we were learning the shortcuts and the ways to get around as we just moved there. It was the evening, as it was around false summertime. The time where it's hot randomly in the springtime, so the windows were rolled down, just having fun cruising and sightseeing. The other person with me, let's call her M, was driving and was chit-chatting to me about the smells and plants I should stay away from. We were passing a cow farm, so we rolled our windows up, because it smelled and the curve past the farm was coming, so we rolled them back down. Now, after you hit this curve, there's a hill and it flattens out into a straight but crummy road. In the middle of the road, something blackish was walking in the middle of the street. It was shaggy and was walking all calm as if it had been sightseeing too. I remember M saying, "What is this dog doing? It looked as big as a black bear or a derpy St. Bernard, and it walked with a normal stride." We slowly crept up on it, hoping that it would hear the car and move out of the way, but it didn't, so M gave the horn a little tap, and this thing finally turned around. Its eyes were reflected from the headlights. It hunched down and hissed. When it turned, its tail lifted and it was long and black. It then darted off into the woods. M was puzzled. I just sat there in disbelief in what I just witnessed. It was an odd, quiet ride back home. Fast forward more than a decade later, a few friends were looking at a local urban legend because one of them swore up and down they saw the ghost everyone was talking about and wanted to know more about it. I'm zoning out because I'm an introvert and went looking around in the website that we found. And I see this title called The Vampire Beast of North Carolina and was like, the fuck? North Carolina got a hillbilly vampire? I clicked on it and read it. Some beast was terrorizing locals and their farm animals, leaving puncture wounds, no blood, and leaving the body there. Multiple bodies of dead animals in one night, all dead the same way. I scoffed and said El Chupacabra, like Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, and kept scrolling. I read some more and saw, here's what the witness recounts seeing.
and when I scrolled down to see a hand-drawn picture of it, I nearly shat bricks. The eyewitness-drawn photo of what they saw looked exactly what I saw with M over a decade ago. The shape, the tail, the color. I went pale and exited out and just sat there thinking of my life's existence of this point, or if I had some sort of brain damage. Because I was like, this cannot be real, what I saw. But what really hit the nail on the coffin is that this thing was attacking people's farm animals, and I saw this thing by a cow farm. I haven't seen this beast again. I really don't want to because I think it's a bad omen, since I have a superstitious family, which is why I think paranormal and odd occurrences happen to us. On the softer levels, nothing evil. When they do have an odd experience, we don't speak about it to each other. But I'll gladly let you guys hear the stories. To help make this story non-scary, I'll call the thing Hillbilly Cat. Maybe it was looking for some moonshine or banjo. Our second story comes to us from Damon687, entitled My Skinwalker Experience. Buckle up, Buttercup, this is a long ride. It was only a few years ago in the spring, summer. I live in Utah and loved exploring with my ex-wife and stepson. We did a lot of geocaching around Utah to keep the stepson entertained. He was still pretty young, like 5, and it gave my ex and I the opportunity to see what all Utah has to offer. We also made sure that at least once a month, she and I would go away somewhere and camp, hike, explore. You get the idea. So during one of our trips, it happened to fall on the weekend where my ex had her son, and I had gotten off work early on that Friday. And so we made a last-minute plan to drive down to Monument Valley and camp out there, and then do some hiking in the morning. We left that afternoon and didn't get down there until a little after midnight. There were no clouds in the sky, no major light pollution, and stars as far as your eyes could see. Side note, if you haven't spent time far, far away from the cities, you will be surprised at how much light pollution prevents you from seeing. We checked with a hotel that is right at the rim of the overlook of Monument Valley, but they were a little too pricey for us. So we pulled off the main road where there's this old, like really deserted parking area that made a semicircle as it jutted off the main road. Completely surrounding that semicircle of red sand and carports were miles of sagebrush, rocks, etc. There were no paths exiting the semicircle. Remember this part. We pulled in and had the headlights of the car facing the tent that faced the road. We laid down our tarp, set up the tent, got all cozy in a sleeping bag. We had that too that zipped into one massive sleeping bag and went to sleep. Right around 3 a.m. I get nudged awake by my ex asking, "Did you hear that?" To which I said, "No." And that's when I heard 2 things outside the tent. I completely froze up because then I saw my ex-wife's face and it put chills down my spine. She had apparently been awake for about 10 minutes before me because she had heard those things fighting. When I finally realized what was going on, that's when I heard them fighting too. It sounded like 2 dogs the size of bears slugging it out. Like they made noises that I'll never forget. Like the deepest, guttural, dog-like human growl or gnashing of teeth. The 2 things I presume heard me loosen my buck knife that I always kept under the pillow, because they immediately stopped fighting and started running around the tent. I could hear their deep breaths and powerful feet hitting the ground. Then they immediately sprinted off towards the road. Remember where the car was facing? Sagebrush to the east of the sand, semicircle, main road to the west, and started attacking each other. That's when I heard a horse snorting roughly 3 feet from my head. I hadn't heard a horse walk up or make any noises. It was suddenly just there. You know that feeling you get when you just know someone is looking at you, even though you can't see them? It was that, plus this overwhelming sense of dread and sheer terror. Well, even though it was spring, summer, we left the rainfly on just in case of a random spring storm, so I couldn't see through it. Nor did I want to even move because I was afraid that it would try to get inside the tent. So I slowly unsheathed my knife and turned on my back, and that's when I heard this horse trying to open my car doors. I could hear it snorting like a horse does randomly as it flicked my door handles. I could hear it start at the passenger door, then working its way around, flicking each door handle until it had gone around the vehicle twice. Once it gave up on the doors, it came to the tent. Here's where I accepted that we were going to die. I've had some paranormal stuff happen to me that just spooked me. I've seen scary movies, etc., etc. But I've never been so scared that I literally felt as the will to stay alive just leave. I had accepted that this evil was here to kill me, my ex-wife, and my stepson. Words seriously cannot explain how much dread was in the air. It was so heavy and drowning. After what felt like an eternity, the horse got up, walked away from my tent towards the east, towards the sagebrush, and the dog things had left. That was it. Nothing. So, at first light, as I did not sleep for several hours after the encounter, my ex and I immediately opened the tent and started looking around at what was outside. I saw hoof prints around the car, and then they led to the sagebrush and literally disappeared. Like there were zero tracks of any horse once the footprints entered the sagebrush. We found the dog thing tracks, and then she and I both saw that they were indeed not dog tracks. The dog prints they left in the sand were about the size of my shoe, size 11.5 American. These were unnaturally large. I've seen bear prints this size, but on dogs, hell no. So we packed up and got the fuck out of there as soon as we had everything torn down. We snapped a couple photos and then immediately took off. Paranormal shit like that makes me real nervous because the feeling of evil will never go away. Plus, after talking to my Navajo buddy, he told me I encountered a skinwalker. So fuck that noise. Our third story comes to us from Tank MM90, entitled Bird-Like Creature in Northwestern New York. Back in 2010 or 2011, I was a medvac crew chief based in Fort Drum, New York. We would regularly do training flights at night to keep current with NVGs. One particular night we had a flight around 10 or 11 p.m. and by the time we were done for the night, it was closer to 1 a.m. My car was having some issues, so the other crew chief offered to drive me home so I wouldn't have to wait on a cab. I happened to live maybe 10 minutes away, which took us off base through a mile of small town, some woods, then open fields to my place. I have made this drive tons of times and never had anything out of the ordinary happen until that night. As we reached the edge of the small town, I noticed a figure in the road near an intersection, just sort of stand up and turn toward us. Despite the headlights being on, all I could see was this black figure with wings that extended past both sides of the road, take off in a blink of an eye. As we get to the stop sign, my friend stops, wide-eyed, and quickly asks, "Did you just..." The only response I had was, "So I'm not crazy." We drove the rest of the way in silence and didn't discuss it at all until the next day. To this day, we still don't know what we saw. 1. Neither of us have ever seen a bird that large in the area before. 2. We have never seen a bird take off as fast as this one did. Our last story comes to us from StatsLmao, entitled, There's Something That Has Followed My Family for 6 Years. I have recently moved a few minutes away from our old house in rural Illinois. My old house is situated on a farm with 40 acres of land. Me and my sister had our fair share of creepy and maybe paranormal happenings, but nothing this bad, and I'm afraid that whatever lived on our property there has followed us to our new house. Backstory: my sister takes one of our dogs out to check on our horses in the paddock because they were making noise. She says she hears something behind her and turns around to see an 8-foot plus unnaturally skinny thing with antlers. She had said she fell on the ground and was paralyzed with fear. As she was laying there, the dog, who will cower at anything, goes into a full tack mode and starts to go crazy. At that point, I ran outside with my aunt and we see her on the ground, no ungodly being. I was very skeptical until 2 months later. I got to my friend's house who lives right down the road on Halloween for a sleepover, and he shows me 2 videos from his security camera. The first showed a pale arm hanging over their front porch. The second showed a finger touching the lens of the camera and a long arm reaching up. Something to keep in mind is that the deck where the camera is situated is around 12 feet above ground. In the middle of all this, his parents see what we are doing and get super mad and scold him about how these videos were not to be shown to anyone. They then went into the other room and the rest of the sleepover went normal, without anything of that nature happening again. But that is what kind of kickstarted my paranormal and cryptid craze. Present day, as of about 2 months ago, I had a dream where I was with my dad, sister, and friends going to an old amusement park of sorts. The place was indoors with the exception of the paintball area outside, and had a jungle gym, arcade, birthday rooms, etc. This place had been shut down for years, and in the dream, it looked way more dilapidated than what it looks like in real life. When we parked the car, my vision zooms in on the roof, and it has a deer with blood all over it. The deer appeared to be dead and lying there. We get closer to the building, and my vision zooms up to the sign, and now the deer is staring at me with a gigantic smile, full of human teeth and saliva dripping down onto the pavement. At this point, I am a bit unnerved, but we still went inside. The inside of this place looked just how it did when I was a kid, with everything in perfect condition. I turned my back on the group for maybe 10 seconds to look at the prizes they had, and when I turned back, the whole place turns into what it looked like on the outside. Everything is rotting and no lights, except for one. One single light shining on my group. The people I thought were my friends and family were now gray and pale, black eyes with blood coming out of their mouth, and pointing at me with a blank expression. The deer comes behind them and they all, including the deer, start saying, "Let death erupt. You're going to die. You're going to die with your eyes wide open." It started as a whisper and upped in volume until they were practically screaming. I woke up, but right before, I hear the deer say one thing that I still have imprinted in my brain. "Remember me." I had the same dream last night and nothing changed except the deer. It had grown around to what I think is about double its old size. Tonight, I went out to lock up our chicken coop and I was walking back inside and heard, "Remember me?" And shortly after, "Come closer. I told you. Remember me." The voice sounded like me, but had an odd and sinister undertone. It sounded like an impressionist who tried to impersonate me, but had smoked for 30 years. Very raspy and false. This leads me to right now. Nothing else has happened, and it all stopped the second I got inside. I've told nobody. I will not tell anybody. If anyone has any idea what this is, tell me. Thank you for reading. Today's first story comes to us from Bellbete, entitled, "I Grew Up in a Haunted House." My childhood home was built by my own grand-something father and has stayed in our family since forever. My mother claims that her paternal side of the family were always rather sensitive to paranormal stuff, despite trying hard to hide this. While the entire house was iffy and plain uncomfortable to live in, there was a certain room that no one could bear to stay in. It used to be my grandparents', but they couldn't handle it and decided that my aunt would sleep there. My aunt wasn't able to either and ended up sleeping anywhere but her own room. When my own parents took over, I was about 4 years old, and of course, they gave me the bedroom. Not that I knew any of this until later years. Both my parents went to great lengths in order to convince me and my brother that paranormal stuff was just made up in order to scare kids. Doesn't change the fact that I went from sleeping through the night since I was 3 months old to barely being able to sleep at all. I would complain about seeing someone scary and dangerous in my room. I still remember the pure terror I felt every single night going to bed. I couldn't sleep unless I was hidden under the comforter while facing the wall, and with a CD drowning out the noise with folk tales and Christmas carols playing in the background. After a while, my little brother started to sleep in the same room, due to his being repainted. It lasted for a couple days before my mother decided that the two of us should sleep in her room while she slept in mine. My father was away for weeks at a time due to work. She told me later that she decided to do that because my brother woke up screaming. I'm a really heavy sleeper and didn't notice, and the next day she saw bruises and what looked like scratches on his back and around his neck. She slept there that one night, but ended up joining us in her own room after. She apparently woke up unable to breathe during the night, and when she looked up, she saw someone on top of her before she was being choked by them. She really thought she was going to die, but managed to throw the thing off her before running out of the room. After that night, nobody slept in my bedroom again. Me and my brother were clueless, despite us both being terrified of what resided inside the bedroom.
Our mom simply pretended that it was nice for me and my brother to share the big bed while she took over my brother's room. This greatly helped my sleep and general feeling of terror. Despite still feeling scared every night in that house, I never felt scared anywhere else. Neighbors and friends would also tell us that they saw someone in the windows of my bedroom, despite none of us being in there. None of us were even tall enough to look out the window. My dad eventually bought me porcelain dolls so they could tell the people who asked that it was probably the dolls set up on the windowsill. I never knew any of this until later on, but it got to the point that people actually started avoiding walking past our house alone because they thought it was haunted. Me and my brother, and even random kids from primary, would talk about, mention, and interact with people in my home who weren't there. My mom always played it off, but you really can't do much when a random kid is asking you about the old man sitting in the chair, or when your son asks about the lady who was petting his feet in the morning. Eventually, the house burned down. Second house fire we survived. We rebuilt, and my mom had the place exorcised at least 10 times by all sorts of different people, from priests to people who claimed to be clear-sighted or able to talk to angels, and practitioners of the cult. This was done in secret, of course. When we moved back in, it was better for a while. Personally, I repressed all memories and ideas regarding anything paranormal or scary. I convinced myself that I was just afraid of the dark as a kid. I lived a couple years in ignorant bliss. But then, it started again. Little things at first. Hearing someone come through the front door, just walk up the stairs, and look around before leaving again when I was home alone. I thought it was a family member ignoring my greeting and was mightily insulted until I found at dinner that no one had been there. Then I started having trouble sleeping again, but only in my room. I never had nightmares, but I had trouble calming down enough to fall asleep. I had a big clump in my chest, feeling like something terrible would happen at any minute. My current bedroom is roughly the same place as the previous one. My toddler brother started talking to people. He had a name for one of them that he would always laugh and smile at, but there was also one which terrified him and would make him start shaking while staring transfixed and cry about mean and scary. I felt my soul leave my body the first time I held him during this. His eyes would follow movements I couldn't see. Then my cousin came to sleep over with my aunt. Only problem was he couldn't fall asleep because of those scary people chanting my initials over and over, and the man who would walk in and stare at him from time to time when he was in bed. Not my bedroom this time. Eventually, I started feeling like someone was walking into my room every night, but I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid due to the recent trouble falling asleep. Sometimes I would hear my youngest brother, at this point a young child, knock on the walls. This continued for several weeks until I asked my mom, who slept in the same room as him, why he was awake and knocking on the walls when he should be sleeping. She said that he had only done that once when she was trying to put him to sleep, but that she had put a stop to it. My brother confirmed it later when I asked him about it. I spent weeks knocking different tunes and repetitions back and forth with someone through the wall, but nobody else even heard it. I immediately quit it, and the wall I often seen as a safe space become another living thing that frightened me. It didn't take too long after that before I regularly felt someone's breath on my face after having closed my eyes trying to, and failing to fall asleep. I couldn't handle this and started staying awake at night to avoid it. I eventually moved out and all my problems disappeared. I didn't lay paranoid in bed waiting for shit to happen. I didn't feel scared and I fell asleep easily and peacefully. I still got my room back at my parents' place, and I've recently moved back. I thought I was over whatever the fuck was going on, but the more time I spend in my bedroom here, the more I start feeling like I used to. I can feel the staring and the breathing whenever I spend too long falling asleep at night. The heavy feeling in my chest is back, and I don't feel fully rested when I wake up, despite sleeping heavily with only good dreams. I don't want to believe in paranormal shit because I find it terrifying, but I can't explain a lot of shit from my childhood any other way. I honestly feel crazy just thinking about all this stuff, but there are so many other people who have experienced shit across my family home that I can't just ignore it, even though I'd like to. Fun fact, the rebuilt house was hit by lightning that caused a minor earthquake which woke up the entire neighborhood. The house was glowing green, according to eyewitnesses. The second story comes to us from the OG_BG, entitled Prankster Ghost Roommate. This is my first long post on Reddit, so bear with me. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts. Furthermore, my dad lived in the oldest house in town, which was around 150 years old, when I was in high school, and I stayed there overnight once a week. I shared a room with my half-brother who rarely slept there. My bed was against a wall that was connected to the upstairs hallway, where all the bedrooms were. There were a few weird things about the house, but the weirdest part were in my room. Above the fireplace, again, a really old house, so there were fireplaces in most rooms. We found that the wood boards were loose there and easily came out. There was a small compartment where we found some old knickknacks, but nothing too crazy. The other odd thing was that there was a metal door knocker that you'd see on the front door of houses, hanging on the door. I never thought anything of these when I chose to stay in the room, but it should have been a red flag. With the house being so old, my family would joke about the house being haunted like anybody would. You'd get the usually creepy sounds that an old house would have, but there was something off about my room. With my bed against the wall to the hallway, I could hear people walking up and down the hall. It wasn't a weird thing until I noticed that almost every night there would be footsteps pacing up and down the hall. I would bring it up to my family asking who was awake and things of that nature, but nobody ever said it was them. I tried a few times to get up and open the door to see who was walking, and there would never be anyone there. If that wasn't enough, when I finally decided that I was just imagining these noises, I started to hear someone using the knocker on my door. I responded with a hello or who's there, but never got a response. Again, I thought it was someone messing with me, but when I brought it up, everyone thought I was just being crazy. After it happened 4 or 5 more times, I finally decided to get up and look who it was. When I opened the door, there was nobody there. I didn't hear any footsteps of people running away. This is when I decided that something was really going on in the house. A couple weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary till I rolled over, eyes still closed, to face the other bed in the room. There seemed to be a light on in the room, which didn't make sense, so I opened my eyes. What I saw sent chills down my spine. There was an older man sitting on the corner of the bed closest to me in what looked like a sailor's outfit. He had a weird green tint to him and he looked right at me. Being a school night, I decided to just turn back the other way, close my eyes, and forget I ever saw it. I fell back asleep to the thought running through my head, "You didn't see anything. You didn't see anything." The next morning, I told my family about what happened. They were obviously skeptical, but it did give more credence to my other mentions of noises I'd hear throughout the night. To this day, I don't know what I saw, but my dad moved out of the house shortly after. It still seems weird that I was the only one experiencing something like that in the house, but I do know I believe in ghosts. Our third story comes to us from ccherry124, entitled, I had a few interesting experiences since I started using my spare room 3 months ago. A little backstory about the spare room. When I first bought my home last year, there was a family of around 13 people living in it, 6 of which were adults, 3 small bedrooms and 1 sketchy annex in the garage. A year later, and the neighborhood is still telling me stories about how awful these people were as neighbors. The annex was initially shoddy framing and drywall work, presumably installed by that family. The walls were painted a weird green color and the rug was a wrinkly, stained mess. It became apparent that someone had been peeing in all 4 corners of the room. I figured it might just be pets, but there was a mirror that had written on it in makeup, and the room was locked from outside. The day we got our keys, I got called to respond to the Seattle riots with my National Guard unit and was gone for about a month. During that time, my wife and the in-laws began renovating the home to make it livable. I felt guilty being unable to help. My wife got together with my mom to convert that scary extra room into a man cave, jam room, with all my music equipment and memorabilia. It came out really nice, but I haven't found much time to use it in the past year. A
A couple of months ago, I built a gaming PC and decided to set it up in that room. Now that I've been going in there almost daily, things have started to feel a little strange around the house. I get the sensation someone is standing directly behind me once or twice a day in the room. Our TV set on fire in the living room a few weeks ago. Our water main burst last weekend, causing us to dig up our yard over the course of 3 days. And my garage lights keep turning on and off. I can hear the light switch. This morning, I got out of the shower to find that my wife had already left for work. I'm coming down the hall and I hear her clearly say, "Hey babe," from the spare room side of the house. I replied, "You're still here?" To which I got silence. I looked out the front window and sure enough, her truck was gone. That's when I heard it again. "Babe, come here." I grabbed my things and noped to work, LOL. Anyway, when I pulled out of the driveway, I could hear what sounded like a girl screaming from outside, followed by a bang. I stopped before backing into the street and thinking, was that my phone? I waited for a second before continuing on my way, thinking it might be the school across the street. I got about 50 feet down the road before I heard it again. This time it was faint, but sounded like it was coming from in the car. I paused at the stop sign and rolled down the windows to see if it would happen again, as it had sounded identical to the first one. Nothing. I roll up my windows and continue on my way to find that it happened several more times, almost like a recording. Same scream/bang, over and over for another mile or so. Anyway, I'm weirded out for the day. Might sage later and bang some pans together, I don't know. Thanks for the read. TLDR, pretty sure my spare room is haunted, and I disturbed it by spending time in there for a couple of months. Heard my name get called by nobody this morning, feel a presence behind me at my desk, and heard strange recorded screams on the way to work. Our fourth story comes to us from Automatic Anxiety 739, entitled, "My Childhood Home and the Marsh Next to It Was Haunted." Back in 2001, my parents bought some property to build my childhood home on the south side of Chicago. Some backstory on the property that we found out after the house was built was that the marsh/swamp on the property used to be dumping ground for bodies from the Italian Mafia in Chicago. The black tar that was in the swamp made it impossible to get out of, and the bodies just disappeared. Fast forward to when my family lived there, we had a beautiful 3-bedroom home with a wonderful yard, swing in the backyard, and a basement that my parents let us write our names all over, a huge highlight of our house as kids. In that basement, we also had a laundry room that was around the corner of the stairs, and some ballet mirrors leading to it. Ever since I was a kid, I dreaded having to go down to the basement, and always felt like someone was watching me. It was never just a kid being scared of the basement ordeal, something truly felt off. One day I was walking down the stairs of the basement, and out of the corner of my eye, looking through the mirror, a man stood staring directly at me. He was tall, with a flat cap and a scrappy beard, plain as day. I tried to scream, but it felt like all the air was gone, just like a dream. He started coming towards the stairs, and as quickly as I could, I sprinted up the stairs and slammed the door. As a child, I was a wonderfully perpetual liar, and knew no one would believe me, so I never said a word. A few weeks went by, and I tried to put the image of the man I saw out of my head, but after that, never felt safe in the house. The scariest instance, though, was when I was grabbing something out of my parents' room, and again felt someone staring at me. For fear of seeing the man again, I began to run out of the room. The only thing was, I couldn't move. I stood there like a statue, unable to do anything except cry. I felt the pressure on my chest like someone was holding me back from moving forward. After what felt like an eternity of being frozen, I finally was able to let out a small cry, and my mother ran into the room and grabbed me. She had to yank me so hard out of that spot, as if I were a mouse stuck in a sticky trap. As we fled the room, the door slammed behind us, and my mom took me outside where I felt I was finally able to breathe. After that, we never talked about that moment. Apart from my traumatizing encounter, my sister also seemed on edge in the house. She could never sleep alone and would frequently scream in the night. This will come into play later, Another thing to note was around the house things would move locations. Doors would open randomly, and if we all left the house, it was in disarray when we returned, as if someone was partying there. My parents never said a word to us about anything that happened, and carried on cleaning as if it was normal. Taken, my sisters and I were from ages 5 to 9 at the time, so I am sure nothing was going to be discussed. Things kept happening over the years, and I would frequently see the man staring through the windows as we came back to the house, around corners, and even sitting in a chair in our living room. Eventually, though, we had to move due to my parents losing our house in the recession, but I never forgot about the house. After we got older, we were all having dinner one night, and we were reminiscing on the old house. I brought up that moment where I was stuck in the bedroom and my mom's face turned white, as she told me she saw a tall man with a flat cap and a scrappy beard holding me there and did not want to frighten me at that time. As she described the man I saw everyone's faces drop. Apparently, we all had encounters with the man. My older sister would see him as she played dolls in the basement, my dad in his garage, my mom with me, but the scariest story was from my younger sister. When she was a child, the man would visit the edge of her bed and stare directly at her, telling her, "Get out. If you don't go, I will kill your family. You're all going to die. I will kill you." Her screams every night were not from some childhood nightmare, but an actual nightmare we all seemed to be living in. She would wake up with scratches from the man that we just assumed was from her childhood eczema. But nope, he could touch her. To this day, we never bring up the old house or drive past the street where it sits. It still terrifies me to today to think about all of our experiences in the house. I will never go back. While it will always be the home I grew up in, I truly consider it a place in hell. And our final story comes to us from STE_FFS, entitled, "What's Going On in Our Flat?" Me and my partner moved in this flat at the end of last January. It's a fairly new flat, part of a block of flats. First thing we noticed after a few weeks is the fridge, brand new, beeping insistently at night and changing temperature on its own, as if someone is pressing the buttons. It would stay silent all day and started beeping at night, or be quiet for weeks and suddenly start beeping when one of us was in the room. We dismissed it as a faulty item. Then we had the toaster being found plugged in the morning and hot as hell, while we were both positive it had been unplugged the night before. We moved the toaster on top of the fridge when not in use. Shoes started falling from the shoe rack in the middle of the night, same as the toilet paper. Google Nest came to life in the bedroom while no one was there and played an Italian song that I've never heard. I'm originally from Italy, while the activity log read, "Unknown voice said to play my favorite song." That freaked the shit out of us. We had the Xbox and the TV turning on and off on their own. I lost a t-shirt, Alice in Chains' Last Tour t-shirt, pretty particular, during laundry. As I was going through all the old clothes coming out of the dryer, I found some long male underwear, which neither me nor my boyfriend ever saw before. We literally went over every single nook of the flat looking for that t-shirt. No luck. 2 months later, my boyfriend is doing his laundry and surprise, the t-shirt pops up out of the dryer like nothing ever happened. Fresh as fuck. Like, last thing, 2 nights ago we were on the couch watching a movie, each at one corner, and a voice could clearly be heard in between us. I think I heard a laugh. My partner says it was more like a hello. Each of us had turned to watch the other, but none of us had spoken. We're pretty freaked out by now, but still dismissing everything as coincidences, as we're pretty rational people. Also, he keeps on having nightmares about ghosts haunting the flat, and he woke me up screaming more than once. What do you think? Should we be worried? Thanks in advance for any advice.
Ouija boards are a joke, right? By Anonymous. To start off, the only reason I wish to remain anonymous is because those involved are still around. Some of these people still suffer horrible nightmares from this night's events, and should they happen to stumble upon this story, I don't wish to cause them any further distress. I will also be changing the names of those involved. And while I understand that this story may sound far-fetched and made up, I can assure you, as much as some random guy on the internet can, that this is what happened that night. And with that, I ask you please be careful with using a Ouija board. This was also the event that set me down the insane rabbit hole that is the paranormal world. Back in high school, I liked to party, and so did my friends. We were great at it. Every weekend was something stupid, something crazy, or something fun. In most cases, it was all three. This weekend, however, things changed. It started off much like every other weekend. We chose someone's house to hang out at, of course making sure their parents weren't going to be home. This weekend it was Ricky's house. Ricky's house was a bit of a dump. I think it was built back in the 30s or 40s, and it showed. His family didn't have money, so upkeep was non-existent. The house was usually a mess, but it was a place we could party and no one would ever know. On this night, things were going absolutely fantastic. We were having fun. I had already worked up a bit of a buzz, and no one else was losing their shit yet. At this point, my friend Tom found Ricky's little sister's Ouija board and came tearing into the room where we all were. He was going crazy with the idea that we should play, and everything seemed to be on board. So, we did. I have had my experiences with these boards before, and nothing ever happened. Someone always tried hard to make it seem like the answers were real, were legit, but usually it failed. But I thought it was going to be a great laugh, so of course I agreed. We cleared an area on the floor so that we could place the board and everyone had a seat. We all had one hand placed on the planchette and a drink in the other hand, and it was decided that Ricky would ask the first question as it was his house. And as usual, the first question was, "Is anyone here?" Ricky asked. "Y-E-S" was the response. There was an ooh and an ah. I thought someone was actually pretty good at moving the piece without being noticed. Susie had the next question. "Why are you here?" D-E-A-T-H. Another couple of oohs and ahs, and this time some giggling. I noticed that people were actually starting to get a bit unnerved by what was happening. Tina had the third question. "Is it because you died here?" N-O was the response. The looks around the room were becoming more concerned. I tried not to laugh and could not help but wonder who was moving the planchette, because they were damn good. I kept looking for someone that was trying to hold back a laugh, but didn't see anyone. John had the next question. "Are you here for someone?" I laughed a bit at this question because I knew it was going to get someone worked up even more. Y-E-S. At that moment, almost everyone removed their hand from the board except myself, Ricky, and Tina. I figured it had to be one of them, but they gave no indication that they were the ones behind it. Everyone started talking about how they were scared and started asking around who was fucking with the board, but no one admitted to it. Slowly, everyone started to come back to the board and place their hands back on the planchette. I decided I was going to watch closely at everyone to see who was tensing just a bit after the next question. "Who are you here for?" The question was mine, and I watched everyone. R-I-C-K. Before it could finish, everyone once again started pulling their hands from the board and staring at Ricky. I looked at him, and he seemed to be in a lot of distress. It then looked like he was attempting to get up, but before he could stand up entirely, it looked like he tripped and fell into the wall next to the window in the room. His face was now red and his lips were starting to turn blue. I thought he might be choking on something, so I ran to him and pulled him away from the wall, which seemed more difficult than it should have been, but I didn't really pay any mind to it. I tried to get my body around behind him to perform the Heimlich maneuver, when all of a sudden I felt a push and a slight burning sensation on my chest. At that exact moment, Ricky went flying through the window. I stood there in shock at what I was seeing. This couldn't be right, I told myself. The window was about 5 feet off the ground, so I could not see Ricky laying there. I ran to the window and noticed now that there was someone on top of Ricky with a hoodie. They were pounding Ricky in the face as if they were attempting to beat him to death. I leapt through the window and immediately ran full force into this fucker. I am not a small guy, 5'10" and 220 pounds. Not all muscle, but as a football player, I know how to hit someone. I slammed the entire weight of myself into this person, and they did not move, did not even act as if I had hit them. They didn't even look at me. I could see the blood pouring from Ricky's face. I began pounding the back of this fucker's head with my fist and feet, and nothing, not a single goddamn reaction from him. A couple moments later, a couple of the other guys came to join me in trying to remove this person from Ricky, and all 3 of us had no luck. Once again, I tried to hit this guy with the full force of me running and a shoulder to the head, but this time, before I hit him, he raised one hand to me and sent me flying about 5 feet backwards. I landed hard, and that small burning sensation in my chest was now a raging fire. I could barely breathe. I slowly get to my feet to see the other guys laying on the ground, not moving. Ricky's body didn't seem to react to the blows raining down on him anymore. I actually feared he was dead. And in my last attempt to help my friend, I once again ran to this asshole who might have just killed my friend and wrapped my arms around them. My weight did not even affect this thing. I was trying with all my might to pick this thing up, and nothing. Not even a slight lift away from Ricky. And then I felt that fucker's head smash into my nose. I felt the blood immediately start pouring out, but this time I was not fucking moving. I held on for dear life. I had no idea what to do. I could feel the tears streaming down my face, and I was slowly resigning to the fact that I wasn't going to be able to help Ricky. As I was about to give up, I heard Tina coming out of the house, speaking something that sounded an awful lot like scripture. Her voice got louder as she slowly walked towards it. And now Tina began singing something. I didn't understand the words, or even hear them really. All I could think about was how this fucking thing just killed Ricky. I started smashing my forehead into the back of its head, and it felt like a brick wall. The closer Tina got, it felt like the weaker this thing became. I tried one last time to pull this thing off of Ricky, and I felt him raise a little. I heard what I could only describe as a roar come from this thing as it finally shrugged me off like I was a child and stood up. It kicked me square in the ribs, which sent me flying a few feet away. I felt my ribs break. Finally, it turned to face Tina. With that hoodie pulled down over its head, I could not see what was there. I started to take a step towards Tina, and I struggled to get back up. I heard Tina's voice waver as the fear was now starting to settle into her. I took one step towards her, and I finally managed to get back to my feet and planted myself between them. At that moment, Tina's voice almost seemed to regain every bit of strength it had when she first walked out of the door quoting scripture. The thing stopped moving forward and stood there for a moment. I heard something say in my head, "Until next time," and then it sprinted off into the night. I sprinted to Ricky's side and checked for a pulse immediately. There was one, but he was unconscious. His face was so battered beyond recognition, I wasn't certain how he would ever recover. We called the cops and an ambulance. We told the cops our story, and while they didn't think we were lying, they didn't think we were giving the full truth of the situation either. I still don't know what happened to us that night, and there are times I feel it could be a really bad trip from someone drugging us, but even years later, Ricky's face is a reminder that it was not a dream or a bad trip. It is still scarred and mangled from the attack he suffered that night. I still have nightmares of that fire in my chest from when this thing hit me. That is my story, and while I know that most experiences with Ouija boards will never turn out like this one, I do hope that you use caution when playing with them.
This story comes to us from Haunting Dream 1571, entitled, Saw a Tall Thin Figure in the Woods. This happened maybe 2 years ago while riding quads with my boyfriend. It wasn't too late at night, maybe around 10 p.m. We were camping at our campground where we have a small trailer surrounded by other camps. In the summer, it's full of kids running around and adults on golf carts. But it was late December and we were one of the few people who go up there in winter since it gets pretty cold and they shut off the water. The woods are a decent bit away from the actual campground. It gets pretty quiet out there and something about the snow makes everything quieter. I've always felt slightly uncomfortable in the woods at night. My boyfriend told me I was just a paranoid person and I chalked it up to reading too much creepypasta as a kid. I always felt somewhat safer since we were on a quad and we can go pretty fast if needed. So there we are in the middle of the night enjoying a cold ride, drifting in the snow, then all of a sudden we come to a stop. That's when I get this eerie feeling. I asked him why we stopped and it was something along the lines of his glove or something on the quad came off. He turned the quad off and bent over, messing with something. I start looking behind me and around me because I'm just someone who's super aware of their surroundings. I look to my left and I see a brown skinny tree that always freaks me out because I mistake it for something else. But then I look to the right of the scary tree and see something even taller and pale looking. I immediately avert my attention from it, being totally freaked out. I find the courage to look back and it seems closer. At this time, I didn't have my glasses on and was just saying it was another tree that looked like a person, and I'm fine. Before I can say anything to my boyfriend, he had finished whatever he was doing and we took off. I buried my face in the back of his jacket, too afraid to see anything else. Still having the feeling of being washed over, I asked if we could go back to the camp and he agreed, since it was so cold. I decided not to say anything to him since he'd want to go back and investigate, or straight up not believe me and write me off as paranoid again, and I did not want to go back there at all. I figured the following day we would go back into the woods during daytime, and I would see that there was another tree that I never noticed before. But when we went back through, and there was nothing next to the brown tree, that's when my stomach dropped. That's also when I told him I saw something last night. He told me I should have told him, which he was right, I should have said something, but I was just too scared and just kept it to myself. We still go there occasionally, not as much due to our jobs now, but I've never experienced anything else after that.
My Encounter with a Mocker by Narrow Raspberry 94. During high school, I had my first serious boyfriend of 4 years, Chris. His family moved here from Mexico and mainly spoke Spanish. This matters because his family culture was rich, and I became very close with his mother and siblings who would tell me all sorts of legends. While we dated, tons of strange things happened, but I'll never forget this. We were FaceTiming each other. He was at his family's house and I was at my mom and I's apartment. Mid-conversation, Chris's mom yelled his name really loudly as if calling him over, which I've seen her do a lot when I was over. His face turned pale and I saw him go to look out of a window. My mom isn't home, he told me. His face was dark and knowing, as if this had happened before. While still on FaceTime, his little sister Tita, 6 at the time, came up and asked him why he had called her over, followed by his younger brother Tito, as if he'd been called by Tita. I have more stories specifically about this house, but from what I was told, it was a bit of a family thing. Although we're broken up, I'm still close with the entire family and feel like asking more about it all.
Our next story comes from little_regressor, entitled, How Do I Know If Something Is More Than a Poltergeist? Okay, this is going to get weird. 2 weeks ago, I had a box fan sitting in my kitchen in one spot all day long. Then that evening it turned itself sideways. I think, oh, the vibrations made it move, so I fix it and don't think nothing else about it and go to the bathroom. I'm in there less than 5 minutes and come back into my kitchen to see the box fan had turned itself sideways again, but the opposite way. I fix it, turn to face the sink, and then right back around to see the fan has unplugged itself and moved into the middle of the room behind me. With that, I got nervous. So I fix it where the fan can't move unless the table and chairs get moved. My daughter goes into the fridge to get something to drink, and just as she opens the door, the new bottle of Tums on top of it rises and floats above the fridge. I'm watching it happen. Wait until she's coming back into the living room to tell her to look, and when she turns to look, the Tums sit back down on top of the fridge. She gets scared and starts crying, and I'm telling her, don't worry, Mommy won't let nothing happen to you. I call out, whatever is in my house, whatever you are, if you are not of God, I command you to leave, now. Rest of the night, nothing else happens. Jump to 3 days later. The handrails in my shower fly off the wall. The shampoo bottle that we sit in this spot for the last 7 years has never just fell over. Falls off the shelf and across the tub. And the doors in the house open themselves up, even locked. Again, I command it to leave in Jesus' name, and it stops for a few more days, other than small noises, little taps and knocks and whispers. Jumping to this morning. This morning, after I got my daughter off to school and was getting veggies cut up to make dinner, I saw a jet black shape of a head peek out of my bedroom. I go to check it out, and when I come back to the kitchen, my knife was moved off the table and onto the counter next to my sink. My cutting board with the onions on it is sitting in my sink, and my broccoli I'd cut up was scattered all across my kitchen floor. I clean up the mess and get my dinner finished and put everything away and wash my dishes. Now I'm seeing short, jet black shadows of people darting in and out everywhere. What is this? Is it a poltergeist or what?
Sleeping with a Ghost by suebieduu. Earlier this year, my friend's sister passed away. I've known the sister for a long time and found her friendly, outgoing, and charismatic. She always stood up for herself, but in a way that didn't make you feel like she was attacking you. So, about a month ago, my friend has a girls' night, and we hung out at her mother's house. As the evening wore on, they insisted that I stay the night. They offered me the sister's room, but said if I felt off about it, I could sleep elsewhere. I said that the sister and I always got along fine. She didn't scare me, and I'm sure she wouldn't mind. Sometime during the night, I woke up when I felt the room temperature drop, and I got chilled. Well, I'm in my 50s, and thanks to menopause, it has to be really cold for me to get chilled. Then I felt a cold presence next to the bed, and I knew it was the sister. I heard my friend from the other room ask if I was okay, and I told her that her sister was in the room. She told me to tell her to go away. I said that this was her room, and she had every right to stay, and that I didn't mind sharing. Then I felt her lay down in the bed next to me. It took a while for the chill to dissipate, but I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I told my friend and her mother what had happened. My friend said she doesn't remember the conversation with me, and that I might have dreamt it. Her mother, on the other hand, believed it and was very happy that her baby girl had joined us for girls' night.
Our next story comes from SpiderTuber6766, entitled An Encounter with the Unexplained. So this is my personal experience. It has only happened once and never again, but I will never forget it. It was 4 years ago in 2018. It was a school night and I was having trouble sleeping. I usually take a while to fall asleep, but this was like I physically couldn't sleep. So I decided to go to the bathroom. I browsed on the phone on the toilet and just went along with my business. The way the house was structured was there was a small hall connecting 2 rooms and the rest of the house. So when I walk back to the room, I look out the hall to the kitchen, and I see it. In the kitchen was a glowing light. It was a rectangle shape floating, as it was surrounded by a black mass of smoky substance. Now at first, I thought it was my fridge, but it was on the wrong side of the kitchen. Then I start to think of other reasons as it stared at me. We kept eye contact for a minute. I was so scared I didn't even think of filming with a phone. But I couldn't be staring all night. I needed sleep and school is tomorrow, so I make a run for my room. As I shut the door, I feel it at the door, as it closed the big distance of the house in just a second. I didn't even lock the door. I didn't care, just jumped in bed and hid under my sheets. Next thing I knew, it was inside my room. I didn't even hear the door open. It floated above my bed as it breathed down my neck. It soon lay in bed with me as I was too petrified to move. The next morning it was gone. I slept with that thing all night. I tell my family and friends, and my mother told me that it was a guardian angel. I'm still not sure what I saw. My rational explanation, I was just tired, and I was hallucinating because of it. It wasn't a dream or sleep paralysis because I was moving and awake. I had another small experience with the same being as it slept in my bed again. I just didn't try to do anything, and the next morning, it was gone again. I haven't seen it or felt it since. My brain thought it was the shape of a human with a long black body and light was its face. If you know what I saw, please tell me, because I will not let this rest. I know what I saw was a real being. We were both aware of each other. We both knew we saw each other. So, I must know. Was it a ghost? A shadow person? An alien? Angel? Or demon? Whatever it is, I'm just glad it was friendly.
I'm Not Sure What I Found in the Clearing by KivliK. Hey guys, I'm back. Your advice last time was super helpful, and I'm hoping to ask yet again for your help with my most recent forest encounter. Every year, when we get the first solid snowfall, I head out to the trees beside my in-laws' house to get my pine boughs for my Christmas wreaths. To give some context, my in-laws live in a rural area on 100 acres. When you go up the driveway, the kennels are on the right, there is a barn straight ahead, and to the left is the house. The house has fields right beside it, and they extend back behind the barn. There is a huge bush, 20 to 30 acres of trees, at the back of the field. If you walk past the house to the left, you can walk along the edge of the field. The field drifts to the right, and to your left is a small patch of dense trees and a pretty steep embankment down to the road level. I packed up my dogs Kaiju, Echo, and Kivli, 3 Alaskan Malamutes. You guys thought they were instrumental in my making it home safely from the last time I was out in the forest, so I bring them with me every time I go into the forest now. Kaiju is a big guy weighing about 120 pounds. Not a chunky guy, this is just solid dog. Echo has grown up a bit since our last outing and is almost as big as Kivli now. I get everyone out of the car, and since this is family property they know very well, and they all have fantastic recall, we go off-leash. I brought an offering of tobacco, as suggested by my dear friend, who gave me some incredible insight from an Indigenous Canadian perspective. I made my offering in a safe place where my dogs wouldn't find it and where other animals couldn't get to it, and listened as I was instructed. I didn't have any feelings of immediate fear or anxiety, so I thanked the forest spirits again as instructed, and we made our way down to the pine trees. I cut my boughs from the bottom of the trees and made sure to only take what I needed. I tried to take the branches that are blocking out the smaller trees, growing under or near them. I was putting my cuttings into a bag when I feel like something is off. Kaiju, who normally does his usual perimeter to pee on every tree in sight, was sitting no more than 5 feet from me, facing the tree line on the embankment, totally still. So still that snow was collecting on his fur and was totally undisturbed. This made me take an inventory of my dogs. Echo, bless her heart, is a total spaz when she's off leash. She has to be running absolutely everywhere. It's like she's afraid she won't get to see everything unless she runs everywhere as fast as she can. She was also sitting completely still, directly beside me, staring towards the embankment. KivliK was the furthest away, maybe 10 to 12 feet, standing, head low, ears up, tail straight down behind her. I immediately thought it must be a deer. There's a heavily used, well-worn game trail down here, and these guys love to watch the deer. I still have a nagging feeling something isn't quite right, so I pack up a little faster. Then I hear it. Kaiju is growling. Kaiju never growls. He's a giant teddy bear. The scariest noise he makes is a Chewbacca sound, and that's just adorable. But now he's definitely growling. KivliK has circled back, head still low. If you need a visual, think stalking wolf. And she's grumbling too. Echo is now standing up, hackles up, baring her teeth. Message received, kids. We are out of here. I grab my bag, check my exit options, and start walking briskly towards the closest trail up the embankment. Kaiju's up front, Kiv and Echo on either side. Then I realized the trees are silent. No birds, no wind, no nothing. It's like we are in a sound vacuum. Kaiju has now stopped dead and is staring straight down. There's a skull, not sure what it is, could be a deer, could be a calf honestly. Not sure what it could be. I have photos to help hopefully identify what it was I was looking at in the link below. In a small shallow, for lack of a better description, grave. No other bones, just the skull. A very clean skull. Kaiju's growling again, and he's got his teeth out this time. I noticed up the embankment there was what looked like a makeshift shelter. This shelter was directly overlooking the hole with the skull in it. All of my dogs are losing it now. They're full-on howling now, which is being answered by the other 3 dogs up at the kennel. It was eerie. It was like they were trying to call for reinforcements. I got an overwhelming urge to be still, like something was trying to wrap me in a blanket to hide me. All I could get out was the word Nacht, night in German, which is what I usually use to tell my dogs to watch me. They all stopped howling, but hackles stayed up and low growls kept going. As soon as the blanket feeling was gone, we ran. I have been to that cluster of trees 100 times. I have never found bones of anything down there. I have never felt like I'm being watched, and I have never been scared to be there. We regularly plant new saplings down there and clear out the grapevine from the older trees so that they don't get choked out. We put out peanut butter pine cones with birdseed for the birds in the winter and keep the hunters out of that area so the animals have a safe place to rest. Am I crazy? Am I looking for something that isn't there? I really hope that this is just a case of an overactive imagination. Here is a link to the photos I took today. As always, thank you all in advance for any insight you may be able to offer.
Our next story comes from DaConsolePeasant, entitled, I Was Haunted by a Ghost in a Ghostbusters Home. Some backstory first. Every year, my family consisting of myself, my dad, mom, and brother, 3 years younger, vacation either to Cape Cod or Martha's Vineyard. By the summer of my 8th grade year, we had vacations at 6 houses in total, and so doing this kind of trip was very familiar and exciting. As of right now, I'm in college, and so my memory of what took place that summer is a bit hazy for some parts, but other parts I have ingrained in my brain. I'm not going to try and ham up the story, so this is the best of what I remember, how the events played out from my own perspective. In the month of August 2015, my family, along with my grandparents, my cousins, one same age as me, and the other 3 years older, and my aunt and uncle, had booked a house on Martha's Vineyard for a week and a half. My family, however, would only be staying for a week as our ferry prevented us from staying longer. Ferry tickets can be extremely hard to get around this time of year. Only 2 days before leaving did our grandparents reveal to us that this house was actually owned by the Dan Aykroyd and was a winter resort for him and his wife that they rent out during the summer. Psyched out of our minds, we were pretty excited to check the place out. Plus, we got an accompanying beach pass, which was a mile away. Skipping to then, we get off our ferry and arrive to the house. My brother and I immediately just out of the car and started exploring the house. Our grandparents would arrive later in the day, with our cousins a day later. To my knowledge, this house is still up for renting, so if anyone is interested, you might be able to see pictures of the house. I haven't been able to since this trip, but I can describe the house as pretty big. The pebble driveway led to the house, which is raised onto a hill. This means the garage basement was level with the driveway, split in half with the living room on the left and the garage on the right, while the main floor was above. Stairs on the right led up to a very nice deck with a hot tub and glass windows along the side of the house. The inside was pretty spacious, and there was 5 bedrooms, including the master bedroom and a makeshift bunk bed in the basement. My grandparents slept in the master bedroom and everyone else in the normal rooms. Now, because my brother and I usually get the shit end of the stick, we naturally get stuck in the basement. Fun. Now to describe the basement. A narrow L-shaped staircase along the house entrance and decks leads into the basement, which has concrete floors and walls, but has many rugs all around. The basement is set up in such a way so that this is the perspective of having the staircase on my left. It counts as a bedroom, but its primary use is for entertainment, with a pool table in the center, a couch on the left of the pool table, and a dresser to the right. The basement room is long and rectangle shaped. At the far right-hand corner, there was a rocking chair, and along the right walls were 3 locked doors spread out, leading to what I assume was the garage and or some other room. To the far left-hand side above was your typical basement sky window. The bunk bed was next to the long L part of the staircase, so opposite across the staircase of where you would come down from. The ceiling of the basement was only 7 foot, or 7 foot 6 inches high, lined with pipes and ventilation airways, so the top bunk bed was pretty close and somewhat claustrophobic. I got the top bunk since I won rock, paper, scissors with my brother. Hopefully my description is adequate. Now, the basement is a bit weird. For whatever reason, I didn't like being down there alone. It just gave off a vibe that wasn't as homey or welcoming as the rest of the house. My family takes us to the beach, so the first day and night was enjoyable as we were setting into our new 1-week house. I'm becoming less of a fan of being in the top bunk, since it's actually pretty difficult to get down from, with the ceiling so low. Our cousins arrive the next day, and so we spend the day doing kid stuff, exploring and messing around. As night came, my family had dinner with my cousins and my grandparents, and soon bedtime came around. My brother and I went to bed, as normally as one would. I remember waking up, feeling like I'm wide awake, but my eyelids feel heavy. I usually tend to wake up in the middle of the night, so this feels like habit. My eyes move towards the dresser, where a digital clock casts the room in a semi-green glow. It reads 2:16. My eyes scan the room, my focus directed towards the sky basement window. The moon was near full that night with no cloud cover, and so it was pretty bright, casting an eerie beam to the center of the wall on the other side of the room. My eyes followed the light and landed on what I can only describe as a white figure next to the rocking chair. Time slowed down as my mind registered in horror what I was actually seeing. The figure looked around your average height of a male, wearing something like a white hoodie. No legs were visible, so there was only black, and I couldn't see the face. The hood being draped over, it didn't have hands, but its arms were moving around each other, at the center of its body, sort of like that dance move. I forget the name, in some kind of tumbling motion. After a second or so, I slap out of my horror, start screaming as loud as possible, and pull my blankets over my head. I keep screaming until my parents come down from upstairs, and I hysterically keep telling them there was a man on the other side of the room. Naturally, they don't believe me, and my dad thought I was dreaming, but the thing is, I was fully conscious, and it wasn't a lucid dream. I could move because I shifted my head to look at the clock on the dresser. My brother was pretty pissed that I woke him up, but also pretty freaked out. We didn't sleep in the basement for the rest of the vacation. A smaller side story happened to my grandmother on the last day she and my grandfather were at the house. At some point during the night, she heard the bathroom door close. The Grandmaster's bedroom door is pretty heavy, being solid wood, but she thought it was my grandfather going to the bathroom. In the morning, she asked why he was so loud going to the bathroom the night prior, and he said he hadn't. The master bed is pretty big and she was half asleep when it happened, so she wouldn't have noticed if my grandfather was in the bed or not. When they go to leave for the ferry, the cleaners came early, and so my grandparents asked them if they think the house is haunted, which the cleaners believed it was. This is probably one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had, but sometimes I wonder, whatever that thing was, that it might not have been a ghost, but actually something more tangible. Something like an actual person who somehow came in through one of the 3 locked doors in the basement. I like to think it's a ghost though, because I think it's less terrifying than a person. And the basement doors were still locked when my parents checked after coming down to see what I was screaming about. Plus, of all places to be haunted, I find it hilarious that it would be Ghostbuster Dan Aykroyd's house. As I've decided, I'm going to tell you a personal experience of mine. It happened some time ago. I did write it with as much detail as possible, but understand I'm not a writer. Now before we start, if you have a story of your own you'd like me to read, please check the description for my email. It's going to be listed there. Now, turn down the lights, sit back and relax, and let me tickle those inner fears. This story I have entitled, Shadow in the Cave. To give a bit of backstory, I've always been a fighter, usually never knowing when to back down. I grew up working on a farm. I played football, and I had a black belt in Taekwondo. Oh, and I'm also a member of the 200 Club. Understand that this isn't macho bravado, because I will run if needed. Pride isn't something that's ever prevented me from running. My point is this, it takes a lot to scare me. All of that out of the way, let's get to it. When I was in college, at around age 20, my friends and I used to love exploring caves. We would spend almost every weekend inside these caves. Now these aren't the commercialized caves that families will visit on vacation. These are the caves that some random person found in some random part of the woods that they only managed to stumble across, and then they would tell others about it. My friends and I would go to 2 or 3 different cave systems every weekend. We would travel all over Tennessee and Georgia to get to these amazing places. We would learn of these spots from Billy Bob or Mary Ann or Earl. We spent a lot of time in these little towns just talking to the locals trying to find these hidden gems. At the time, we weren't really big on drinking, but we did like to find a nice spot in a cave and drink a few beers and tell some good old-fashioned ghost stories. Usually, when beer was involved, we often ended up sleeping overnight and leaving early in the next morning. On this occasion, we returned to a cave that we had been to a good number of times. It was a very large system. We would return to the cave several times a year since we learned of it. As many times as we had been there, we were far from exploring the entire system. So we would return from time to time to explore more of the cave. We frequented the cave often enough that we had some sleeping bags there. Now when I say this cave was huge, I mean it was huge. After dozens of visits, we probably only explored about 5 miles of this cave, and there were still 2 other shafts left to explore. But this trip would prove to be my last trip into a cave ever. Okay, so I changed the name of my friends to keep them anonymous, but let's go ahead and get to the heart of the story. The entrance to the cave would easily be missed if you didn't have a guide the first couple of times. Even with the most detailed instructions, it would be almost impossible to locate.
The mouth of the cave was no more than 2 feet wide and was hidden by several trees. These trees appeared to have been planted there to keep the entrance hidden. I do not think this is the case, however, one never knows. That weekend it was 4 of us, Drew, Alan, Selena, and myself. We had packed our backpacks, making sure to have extra batteries, water, snacks, and a change of socks if needed. Once we arrived, we grabbed our gear and headed out on the 30-minute hike to the cave entrance. After reaching the mouth of the cave, we relaxed a few minutes before going in. Once inside, we set out to explore the parts of the cave that we hadn't been to yet. It was, according to stories, the largest of the passages, so we were very excited to see just how big it was. We decided that we were going to stay overnight on this trip so we could explore as much as possible before we had to return to our normal lives. It took us about an hour to get to the unexplored passage, as there were a number of squeezes, so moving was a bit slow. We finally arrived. My watch said it was about 4 p.m. at this point, so I felt we had a good bit of exploring ahead of us before we settled in for the night. We had a great time. So many beautiful sights, so many gorgeous formations, and so many little corners to explore. We spent a good 6 or 7 hours just trying to take it all in. Of course, we took the best pictures we could so that we could show them off to those that weren't able to make it with us on this trip. After our time exploring, we decided we were going to start heading back and just set up camp near our usual spot, which was closer to the entrance of the cave. We got our sleeping bags rolled out and set up a small lamp that illuminated just enough so that we could see the others. We plopped down on our sleeping bags and popped open some cold beers and started telling ghost stories as usual. After a couple hours, we turned in. I was laying there just thinking about how beautiful the cave was when I felt a cold hand on my arm. I looked in that direction and can barely make out Drew's form looking at me. I made an offhand joke about him not being my type, but I saw him shake his head no. I looked harder into the darkness so that I could see his shadowed face, and now I could see that he was scared. I followed his line of sight, and then I saw it as well. About 30 yards away was a shadow so dark that it stood out among the darkness. I have never been so terrified in my life. Something in my being told me this was a danger that I had never experienced, and I needed to run. I scrambled for my flashlight, which was all of about 2 seconds, and shined the powerful beam at the exact spot that the shadow was, and nothing. I was on my feet immediately. Alan, Selena, we're leaving now. I started to get my stuff together, and the others got up to do the same. My friends knew that I am not one to panic or be fearful, so when I said we were leaving, they knew it was serious. We got our belongings packed in just a few minutes, and we were about to head out when small rocks started to pelt us. Selena and Alan both started to panic, but I just pushed them on as fast as possible, with Drew behind them and myself in the rear. I kept looking over my shoulder as we went, not knowing what was happening, just knowing that we needed out. Whatever was behind us had no light in this cave and was able to throw rocks at us accurately. I was on the edge of panic, and every instinct in my body was screaming run faster. But in a pitch black cave with 3 others stumbling in fear in front of me, that would only make matters much worse. And I had this feeling, this sickening feeling, that if we panicked, whatever was following us would have been that much more dangerous. The only sound in the cave was the footfalls of my group a few feet in front of me, and a single set behind. And suddenly, a second, heavier set, and both were chasing us. Overwhelming fear came over me. I yelled for the others to move faster, and they started running as fast as possible. I watched my friends start to stumble as they tried to run, and realized this is exactly what these things were wanting. They were hunting, playing with their fear-stricken toys. We were about 100 feet from the mouth of the cave, and I knew we weren't going to make it before they caught us. I yelled at Drew to make sure that the others got to safety, and he knew where I was at if I didn't come out. I guess the tone of my voice made him realize that there would be no argument, so he pushed them on. It was my time to stand. I had no delusions that I could hold my own, but the others needed a little more time. So I spun around and lifted my flashlight at where the footfalls were coming from, and they stopped immediately. There, about 20 feet from me, were 2 figures that looked like they were just a couple of guys, wearing hoodies pulled over their heads. I could not see their faces. I cannot express how much it terrified me that they still had no light in this cave, and there were 2 of them. They were so fast. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. They didn't move, nor did I. Eventually, though, I started to slowly back away. I had put another 20 to 30 feet between us before they started to stalk forward. I could hear that the others were starting to make their way outside the cave, so now was my time. I spun and started sprinting for the entrance, but I could hear that they were already gaining. I am a 20-year-old man who had played football, halfback actually. I ran track, and I ran sprints every morning. I was fast, but these two gained on me like they were trying out for the Olympics. At about 10 feet from the cave entrance, I could feel them. They were so close. I continued my sprint to the entrance and tried to dive through the tight squeeze, but I felt a hand clamp around my right ankle. This hand had stopped my flight forward instantly. I landed hard on the ground, smashing my face against the rock floor. The pain exploded in my face, and I knew my nose was broken. I felt the blood start flowing immediately. I tried to scramble forward, but could not kick out of this iron grip. I was about to turn and fight when I felt hands wrap around my wrist and start pulling, and almost immediately, the grip on my ankle released. Drew and the others pulled me out, and we wasted no time getting up and running back to my vehicle. It was night, and we ran as fast as we could, but with the branches whipping our bodies, tearing our clothes, and slicing our cheeks like tiny razor blades, it was much slower than we had liked. We finally made it to the car and got in. I drove off as fast as I could. Safety was not a concern. I drove for about an hour and then pulled over. There we sat in the car, in silence, for hours, each not wanting to break it for fear of acknowledging that actually happened. I do not know what was in that cave, but I do know, if they chose to do us real harm, there would have been no stopping them. They were just too fast and too strong. And that, my friends, is the last time I ever stepped foot in a cave.
Thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the stories. Be sure to check out the links in the description. And that, my friends, will be it for now. Thank you for spending some time with me. But until next time, remember, just because you couldn't see it, doesn't mean it wasn't watching you.